Hello, everybody. Rudros here with my man Jared Wallace, all the way from Japan, Mr. Eureka himself, and it is time for Opus 21 and our set review. Jared, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on as always.
Oh, you're welcome. Folks, bear with me. I'm kind of coming off a sickness here, so might be a little slow, and you'll have to forgive me if I'm hacking up a lung. A couple housekeeping things. Thanks to Mysidia Gaming, as always, for the wonderful thumbnails. And I just wanted to let you know where I was coming from on these, and I'll let Jared say where he's coming from. I evaluate these cards pretty much from a standard constructive perspective. So if you've got a card that maybe it's great in draft, I'm sure it is, but I just don't really look at it that way. So I just wanted to let you know that's basically the point of view you'll be getting from me. And since the set's been out for a bit on Octagon, I have gotten to test with quite a few of these, and I'll try to make that distinction clear when I've tested a card versus when it's hypothesis. What about you, Jared?
Yeah, more or less the same. So normally I would, as a Japan player, be more interested in how these perform in L3 to a certain extent, because that would be half my competitive season. But since we're in the off season, there's no L3 for me this season. So I won't be thinking about that very much either. Might name drop a card if it's fun for drafts, just because even though there's no competitive draft this season either, it is fun to play. And sometimes there are just cards where their only redemption is limited. So
Fair enough. Yeah. You ready to jump into it?
Yep.
All right, let's start off with a wonderful full art here. This is Ward. He's a pretty basic fire forward. It's probably an upgrade in Magissa over Forza because you can actually hard cast it, and it's got the EX burst, which is nice. Why? I don't really know why the restriction is on there. I don't know, would that have been too... I don't know, whatever. Anyway, he's fine. I really only see him seeing play in Magissa, and do you see him any places outside of that?
Well, I do think so. There is the new. We'll get to him in a little bit. I can't remember his name. The 5 CP warrior dude that that tutors for your warriors and then gets to play one. So it is just a solid card for that whole warrior package if you're going for it. And I think the reason the restriction is on there is because it's plainly above curve. It's a 3 CP 8 that also has a decent ETB. 7k isn't really where you want to be for these effects a lot of the time anymore. Usually you want to be dealing 8k, so you can kill a 4 CP forward with this. That's when it would be really, really good. So I think they kind of want you to use him with the whole buff your damage guys, you know what I mean? But yeah, I'm not super excited for this, but also it is just kind of an above curve decent card. Maybe it shows up in mono fire as a nice little one or two of, the EX burst is useful after all. So
absolutely. Next, we have King Edgar, and I was quite surprised when I saw this by just how generically good it is. Usually cards like this have just some kind of restriction. Only if you have this many 6 characters, or only if the moon is at, half quarter. I don't know. Edgar just says, play a 2-cost character, not forest character, and then do it again, leave. I'm wow. Andy's category WAF, so he fits there because honestly, you probably couldn't fit him in 6 anyway. So yeah, solid good card. I've played with it. Feels really good if you do him into a monster, him into another backup, or him into a forward. Overall overall good card. Nothing else really to say about it.
Yeah, I thought this card was going to be really, really good. Over the top, insanely good. And I have found that he is just a little bit restricted in that you can't play a whole backup lineup full of 3, 4s, 5, 6s, whatever it is, and also not have any forwards to play off it. You kind of need to have a good healthy mix of 2 CPs. So for example, when I was playing Warrior of Light, if I just played Warrior of Light backups and it's Sarah, Claris, this guy or whatever, I didn't really have anything to play off of the Edgar. Just a little bit too much, because a lot of the time the Zidane that you want to play off of this is also your fire CP, and it just doesn't kind of work out. That being said, obviously it is very powerful when you just do it, and you can break it off later. It is Sarah and Clara searchable. It is WAF for the WAF deck if that matters. But yeah, good card.
All right. Next, we have Flame Serpent General Gadalar. I've never played 11 much, so people have to forgive me if I butcher these names. A bunch of the generals got cards. They all have this. If you control this many of the same element, you reduce them by 2. So essentially, you can think of them as 2-cost 8Ks. This one can attack twice, although weirdly it doesn't have Brave, so it has an action ability to activate it, but then you're spending 2 more into it just for an extra attack. And it's like it has First Strike or any other on-attack effect, so I can't see this in standard. Just seems kind of like a generic thing, unless there's some like hidden text somewhere that can pull out the potential. But other than that, it seems kind of just meh to me.
I think what they wanted us to do was to play this guy with the light one, Regagine, which we'll talk to a lot more about, or I'll talk a lot more about that card later because I have a lot of thoughts about it. But obviously, if you have him next to Regagine and Regagine is dealing a point of damage, and then this guy gets Brave, First Strike, Haste, and then is also doing a point of damage, and then another point of damage because it can attack twice. Like it does kind of seem like there is like a payoff built into there, but he is kind of underwhelming without his other buddy next to him. That being said, I did think about this again in Mono Fire because Regagine is a nice haste enabler, and Fire has other haste enablers as well. We have all the goblins, and then the goblins work with Demon and Ace and other cards too. So maybe this is like your way of putting on a nice amount of damage pressure in that deck, which is otherwise basically all of your attack triggers are. I mean, they deal 1 obviously, but they're really only just clearing the board, right? This is a way to kind of force a different type of advantage that Fire is actually really, really bad at forcing in general. So I think it could be okay. I need to play with it more myself and like kind of understand where Mono Fire sits in a meta and whether this card even just makes a cut at that point, But if you are able to put on like some pretty consistent damage, especially with Regagine next to him, then I could see this card being potentially playable in standard.
All right. So you think of our legend here, Cyan. So this is a card that, in my opinion, has greatly benefited from seeing it in action, because when I first read it, I was like, I saw the goofy artwork, and normally I love a mono artwork, and it's not that I don't love this. It's just, he just looks very goofy and kind of.
It's very goofy, yeah.
And it was like another Cyan legend. It's crystals. I'm not really into crystals, so I kind of just blew it off at first. And I was thinking, like, I kind of only thought of it for the board wipe. Okay, so if you bring this guy in 3, you got to spend another 5 to get full crystals. Then the Amaterasu it, and you just spent 8 on nothing. Like, I don't know. But seeing it in practice, he greatly benefits from already having crystals when he enters, because yes, paying a total of 8 to get that board wipe is very pricey. But if you've already got 4 crystals in stock, as I saw many times with people using him, and I only have to pay 1, suddenly I'm paying 4, and then I can 9k just their board, not your own. So he's not like Sasano where he hits both sides. I was like, that's pretty good. Or had him with the, I can't remember her name, but a girl we'll see later who buffs the damage they deal, then suddenly those crystals are pinging for 5 apiece instead of just 3. And I was like, well, how about that? And then he can technically even survive Amaterasu by using a crystal himself. So if you have crystals ready to go for this guy, my opinion of him just went way, way up. If he has to generate it all entirely, like if you're playing a deck with no crystals and he's the only way to do it, then I don't know how I feel about him, but I really turned around on him once I saw him, and I actually like him quite a bit.
Yeah, this is something that I thought about a lot when I was exploring Firewater DFF for my national event. Like about a month ago, I guess, is when like the DFF cards really came out, and the DFF cards, like, they don't read individually like super powerful because either they like take 2 crystals or they make a crystal sometimes, and those don't tend to look like super powerful. But when you like jam a whole deck full of all of these crystal cards, they're actually just like pretty good. In my experience, it's kind of like when Lena came out, we thought like, well, yeah, 3 crystals is like, you can do that maybe like once a game or like twice a game. But like when you start to be able to do like these kinds of like effects that look really pricey, because there's just so many cards that generate crystals and so many cards that are good that actually use up the crystals, they get a lot better. And that really increases the value of your crystal backups and stuff like that. Like, obviously this card doesn't look good if you have to pay 8 for it, but if you've already like played 2 crystal backups, then you're only having to pay 6 for the board wipe at a much earlier point in the game. And obviously we did get the new crystal backups too, so we'll talk about those in a little bit. But I just think that the card is good. I think I agree with you. I don't think I'm very into the card if it's just like a standalone board wipe where you have to like pay for all the crystals up front. But in a deck, especially the DFF crystal deck, where like Bartz and Firion are just independently really, really strong cards all by themselves, and then Cyan kind of like compounds on the same thing, I think there's a lot of room for fire-based crystal decks, maybe even in mono fire at this point, that are worth exploring.
Well said. Well said. Well, since you love fire crystals so much, we'll pull up the black mage, get another one. Real quick, can the crystal ability on this, can it stack with itself? Like, can you pay it a bunch of times to up the cleave?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of nice. However, other than that, you're basically paying for if you want that crystal on entry, and then, of course, it has to wait until you attack. So, probably just fodder. I don't see it in standard, but it's kind of cute that you can stack the effect at least.
Yeah, paying two crystals to deal 10k is like kind of a steep price when you're looking like next to Cyan and some of the other cards that we have. We can do so much with 2 crystals, But yeah, it seems more like a little, a way to make it playable in the smaller card pool formats. Give us another way to make crystals so that it can actually do something. And I do think potentially in limited it could be okay.
Yeah. All right, we'll see what you think of, speaking of more crystals. So this is our line of crystal backups. Every element got one, so we'll kind of just talk all about them here in this one. This is a samurai. They all have this text. When they enter, you gain a crystal, and if they're one of your first 3 backups, you also get to draw a card.
Yeah.
I've tested them out, and I don't know, I kind of go back and forth. If you see them within that first 3 and you get to draw, I absolutely love them. Sometimes I don't see them till later, and I don't want to pay 3 to just get a single crystal. Yeah. That feels bad. Some of them do have relevant jobs, like the Earth one is a monk, this one is a samurai. Those decks haven't really been around, and I don't think these are going to bring them back into prevalence, so I don't know how much that matters. Maybe it will. Other than that, yeah, it's nice to have kind of just basic crystal generation on a backup. Again, overcosted, but better if you see them early. So I guess it really just depends on how much you think you're going to see them early versus seeing them later. So yeah, they seem solid to me. What do you think?
I think that these are pretty solid. They work really well with the new 7-drop Warrior of Light, which is something that I've seen a lot of people messing around with. I think it's a pretty big gain for heavy crystals synergy mono decks, which don't really exist right now. But that's not to say that they couldn't exist in the future. I could easily see, if Mono Fire just wanted to play all of the Fire DFF crystal cards and maybe some old crystal cards or whatever, that you would just play 2 of this one and 3 of the 2 CP ones or whatever, because you can just do that. There's no reason not to. If you can, you might as well. Additionally, it's nice. It's really, really nice for the Fire Water deck specifically that I had built to have access to some odd costed crystal backups, because that deck has Sarah FFL and Luna and Arya and Sarah, and there's the only odd costed backup that we could play in the whole deck was Princess Sarah, and it was just very, very frustrating to always be off curve basically. So you can potentially build a better curve with these crystal backups available, and I do think they kind of belong more in the decks that are willing to play 16, 17 backups, and not so much in the decks that are looking to play 13, 14, because they're shaving and playing tutors and stuff like that. I just don't think that they fit in those kinds of decks. So I think they kind of fit into an older mentality of deck building with backups that are strong when you just play a lot of backups in general. If you just play more backups, you're more likely to have these 3-drop ones. If you play 2 sets of them, you're more likely to have them early. They're more likely to be better, and you can just discard your extra backups later in the game, which is something that we did for 15 sets, and then we kind of just stopped playing backups for a little while, and then we played fewer and fewer backups. And so it doesn't really fit in the mentality that we're going for now, where you just play as many search backups as you can. But if you're playing that older style with the crystal backups that existed before, and fewer search backups, and just more backups in general, I do think they fit very well into that sort of frame.
Yeah, fair, very good assessment. Next, we have our next legend, category 6, getting some Fire Legend love here. This is Shadow. This is a weird card to me. I haven't seen anyone use it yet. So it's Warp 3, but it only costs a single fire. However, you remove warp counters at the end of the turn based on a bunch of category 6 forwards. So you could very ideally play this, go to your end phase. He's immediately going to come in. And then when he comes in, you discard your entire hand and you draw 2. Well, I don't know what to think about that, because in the 6 lock decks, or it's the Title 6 deck as people call it, generally their hands are pretty well stocked, and so I'm kind of would you really want to throw your hand out just to go 2? But I have seen some more aggressive 6 decks where they play out a bunch of forwards and their hands are kind of empty, and I'm well, in that case it's probably kind of nice, because he's basically a 9k draw 2. So The only other thing is, though, the backups in that list are a little like name limited, and Shadow was not that he was some great backup, but he was just another name that you could put down for the fire slot. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to think of this card. Like, or maybe if you are playing aggressively, maybe you don't even warp. Maybe you just pay the full 7. You've emptied your hand to do it, and he essentially then just says draw 2 cards, which that's obviously very good. So I don't know. I don't know what to think about Shadow. Give me some insight on this guy.
Yeah, I think he's basically limited to the 6 title deck, as you said. I'm not a huge fan of like just playing this card as a 7-drop. Like, some people have said that this card is just like generically good. They liken it to Seasoned Pyromancer from Magic. If it has the same effect basically, you discard 2 cards and you drop 2 cards, it's a pretty powerful card. But I don't think that it's really that good. It's not nearly as good as Seasoned Pyromancer. First of all, card draw is just less valuable in Final Fantasy than it is because it's so much more prevalent. You just draw more cards. And so it's a lot less interesting, and there's nothing to do with cards in your break zone the same way there is to like reanimate or whatever in MTG. It's much easier to get cards in your break zone, so there's less value in cards that could put cards from your hand into the graveyard in MTG. So yeah, I don't really like the comparison in general. I don't think it's a very good return on investment if you just cast it. Now, if by casting it you trigger lock, that's like a different story. Like, if you can just pay 7 for this and then draw 2, discard your hand, draw 2, flip a card, and then something at 3, then I think that's fine. Obviously, I think there's going to be a lot of times when you can just warp it and just immediately get it at the end of the turn by going completely empty, and then you've made a board of like 4 forwards, I guess 4 forwards is what it's going to be most of the time or more, and then if this is happening like fast enough in the game, which presumably it is because you have fewer backups, and that's just how 6 kind of works. Your opponent is going to spend a lot of resources to try to kill it, and then when you untap, you're going to have 4 fresh cards in your hand. So I do think that the card is very strong. I think a lot of people are thinking about it a little too hard. I'm pretty sure I think a lot of people are just like trying to do like all of this math to figure out like how we warp it, what we're supposed to do with it. If we're supposed to warp it for 1 turn and then make sure it comes in the next end step or whatever. And I'm just like, no, I'm pretty sure this is just an extender. You're just supposed to dump your entire hand on the board and then warp it, draw some more cards, and just be done. I don't think it's really that complicated. There is that whole, it definitely eats a backups. It takes away your backup slot, basically. But I think that this card, the point of it is like, well, you don't need to back up if you just have more cards in hand, right? Yeah. It's like it's economy in a different way, and I think that's kind of where they want to push 6 into going. So, yeah, I think that this works with a lot of the 6 strategies. I'm pretty sure that the purpose of making this card at this time was because they did expect us to have like some of these 3-color 6 decks where like Stragos and cards like that were being splashed in without any real good way to cast them besides just drawing more water cards. And from that perspective, Fire Ice was kind of lacking that extra draw, quote unquote, that Stragos brings to the table. And maybe this is a way to bring us back into strict Fire Ice now that we have Terra and Shadow, which are just generically good cards that provide economic advantages that Stragos had before. Additionally, it obviously works really well with the Stooges because they just immediately vomit 3 forwards to the board, so it just works, So, yeah, I think the card is good. I think a lot of people, I've probably not even played against 6 even once, since this set started, and part of that is just because it's new toy syndrome. Sure. It is what it is. Everybody wants to play the new cards, and I cannot blame them. I want to play the new cards too, but. When 6 starts coming back around, people start messing with it. I fully expect to see this card in spades.
Awesome. I appreciate that insight. Well, we'll see what you think about this next one. This is Vermilion Bird Lassie K-Tuna. It has 2 action abilities. The second one is pretty costly, but it's kind of like a last-ditch trying to survive. Something you're going to do, or maybe you're going for lethal, and you can clear out 2 forwards, hitting them both for 10k. Quite nice. Then it has the old 5 CP Una effect, kind of, on an action ability, where instead of a card going to the break zone, you exile it, which for a lot of cards, they do have text that if they have a break zone trigger, they have to hit the break zone. Very few cards have it just whenever they leave the field get this effect. So it does work on those. It's nice and cheap. It's just a 2 cost, so you can't complain about that. However, I don't think that action ability is quite on the level Yuna was, because Yuna was just a replacement effect. Anytime something left the field, you can just exile all. If you did a board wipe, if you did a Shinryu, you send them all away. This one, not only, you actually have to target the forward. So I've already seen an instance where it was like, okay, I'm going to hit this forward with a summon. Oh, and then before it dies, it has to be a valid target. Target it with the K-Tuna so it gets exiled. And then they go, okay, well, like Chocobo or whatever it was, save it in response. It's like, oh, cool, I just spent an extra CP to essentially get nothing accomplished. I would like it a little better if you could, like, I don't even know how you would word it, but if you could have that Yuna effect where after it had already died, then you could exile it, but obviously you have to be able to target the forward. And just in general, break zone triggers just aren't as prevalent nowadays as things were like back in Porum, so I know I've said a lot. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but it's just, I don't know. I'm also not like, wow, it wasn't as amazing as I first thought it was when I first saw it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this card suffers a lot from like the exact templating of the card. If it was like if it was a 0 CP ability, I would be pretty happy with like splashing one of these. Or if it was an ability that I had to tap it, but I got to choose, like you said, I got to choose like if a card would be put into a break zone, you can tap her and then do that. If it was like an auto replacement of some kind, then yeah, I would be pretty into that too. The bottom text is pretty costly. Again, you mentioned it as like one of the last ditch things. Seems more like it's going to be something to think about in future L3 formats and or limited, rather than something that's going to happen a whole lot in standard. Obviously, you can't search this, which is another really sad thing. There's the Miyu that we got that searches Agito cadets, and obviously Setsuna is not one of the Agito cadets, but she kind of looks like one. Kind of got excited for a second, But yeah, so if this card was just like searchable, I could maybe see it in Mono Fire, but it's not searchable, and yeah, there's just too much to fight for this card to actually.
A lot of happenstance. Yeah. Next, we have a standard unit warrior. Normally, I just like blow past these cards. However, as we'll see with this next card coming up, and we've got this new warrior support this set. He does really fit well with that, and there are warriors you're going to want to protect. Yeah. So, granted, he's kind of generic in that sense, but also he can be used at instant speed. He doesn't have summoning sickness the moment he comes down. Oh, he's got to protect something. So, I haven't tried the warrior list, nor have I seen anyone else playing it. So I can't speak from experience, but I would think that text makes him at least worth a look.
Yeah, it really doesn't look bad at all. It's kind of like if you expect to never cast this card, then it's actually like pretty solid. I think you're gonna play him off of the guy's action ability, or you're gonna get him for free off of wall. And so like in those circumstances, just having like a kind of Titan effect, it's just like a forward that is also kind of a summon that you just play alongside it. I don't know how important that slot is for the warrior deck. That's like something that like people who are really jamming warriors over a lot of time will kind of figure out how many of this you're supposed to play. But yeah, I would totally not be surprised to see, 1, 2 of these I would expect in the warrior decks just alongside your big dude.
Yeah. Speaking of which, next we have Tyvis, who I mistakenly read as my own name, Travis, the first time I saw him. I mean, he looks like me, right? Long, luxurious blonde hair, beautiful beard, only in my dreams. So when I read this, again, I haven't seen the Warriors in action yet, but reading this card, he sounds absolutely busted. Most cards with a repeatable action ability like that, think of Palom, Porum, Rydia, Penelo, most of them don't really have like either any on-entry effect or one that's really relevant. Obviously, Rydia just gives her counters. This guy searches out a warrior. He can search out the very thing he can then free play with, and he's a 9K, so he won't die to Amaterasu. And then he just jams out warriors like that. That just sounds so strong. So, not having seen it, speculation-wise, the only thing I can think that would even hold this back is just that what are the warriors he can play? Are they worth actually putting out on the field for free? But everything that this guy has on his text, he just sounds absolutely nuts. So if warriors are going to be a thing, surely it's going to be because old Tyvis here is carrying them to the goal line. What do you think?
I tend to agree with that assessment. I think that this card is obviously like the best warrior card that we've ever seen, I would expect. There is, if you go looking, a lot more warriors than you would expect. Like it searches, like Guy and stuff like that, and a lot of the rebel cards that existed were also warriors. Like the Furians are warriors, so it fits in pretty well with like the fire theme. Axstar is a warrior, and that is like the best warrior probably, and probably one of the, because he's a 3 cost, so you can search him with Tyvis and then play him with Tyvis, and then Axstar triggers, and yeah, your Tyvis gets still frozen, but it's kind of like Magisa, where you're just like you get to extend the board and you get more rewarded for playing these 3s. Additionally, I think in that regard, he does fit really, really well alongside Magisa. I don't know like what the deck building restrictions alongside that really look like, Obviously, like, Magisa was not a deck that just had a ton of deck slots to, like, fill with, whatever stuff that it wanted, but it kind of does a similar thing. I don't know if it's quite as strong as Magisa, but maybe it's a nice supplemental strategy, or maybe it's kind of like an adjacent strategy that works a lot like Magisa does, but in a different way. And in that sense, I'm pretty excited to see where this deck goes. I could see avenues, for mono fire. I could see avenues for fire water. Yuzuki is another warrior, and so you can search her out with this and play that and kind of protect the Tyvis from damage, which is something that's really interesting to me. So yeah, I'm curious to see where this card goes. I haven't built enough with it. It's not so straightforwardly powerful that I would choose to build with it over other cards at the very start of a set. You know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of really powerful cards that we're gonna get into later. I'm not sure that like all of my focus would be on this, but it is interesting. It's just really hard to figure out like what mix of cards you will be playing with it, and it's going to take a lot of testing to get there. I think.
Absolutely. I'm curious to see where he ends up. Speaking of which, we've got more deck building around to talk about. We've got a brand new category, Sopfo or Sopafo. It's Strangers of Paradise. So this is Neon. I haven't tested any of the Strangers of Paradise stuff. I've heard people talk about it, but I haven't actually watched anyone use it in games. So again, this is going to be mostly speculation on my part. They all seem to be in a lot of different colors, so again, I don't really know what the build is, if there's a rainbow build, if there's certain colors you should focus on more than others. Neon's text, however, is pretty strong, assuming she's on the field when she resolves. She does 8k to 2 things, which mean most fire 4-cost 8ks do 8k to 1 thing, so that's already an improvement. She's going to hit 2. And then, of course, that little damage increase that a lot of fire cards have, she has that as well. Again, I don't really know where that fits in the overall picture, and because of her text, you can't just play her alone in a mono fire deck. You have to support her with some Strangers of Paradise. Right. So we'll see. Her text reads good. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, if you're playing this card, you have to play Jack. We kind of have to talk about Jack just a little bit. I won't go into in depth about him, but yeah, Jack is going to search all of these main party cast people, and Neon. I've played a bit with Jack packages. I've tried it with Wall. I've tried it in various 2 colors. I tend to think that they're just pretty good cards. They kind of suffer a little bit from the drawing the deck out of order syndrome. So I do think that because you need to have Jack first, because he's the only one that really works without somebody else on them. Unless you can cheat them both in at the same time, which I've also done with Cecil. But it's a little technical. I won't get really deep into how you stack check in those things and make it work, but in general, yeah, it tends to suffer from the drawing the deck out of order thing. Obviously, you don't want to draw Neon before you draw the Jack, or goes for all the party members, but yeah, the same thing. That being said, when you do draw Jack and you just like Jack, Neon, kill your 2 dudes, especially when you're playing against, like 13 or whatever, and they're like Vanilla Hope, turn 1, and you're just like, okay, well, cool, I'll just play Jack, and then Neon, and they're both dead, and then I have 2 huge beaters, and you just have a light card in your hand, It tends to be pretty good. I think Neon, the 8k is really useful, and it works really well with the 4CP Warrior of Light, that we've come to know and hate or love, depending on which side of the table you're on. It buffs his damage to 6k. It also works so that he can combo with this to kill more than an 8k, which is something that has come up a lot for me. Yeah, I'm just pretty high on these cards in general. I wouldn't expect us to just out of the gates know exactly how we're supposed to build well with this set. I'm not sure if we play Jack Garland. I'm not sure if we play some other mix of stuff. There's a whole lot of options for the 4-color wall deck. Additionally, I'm not sure that there's any like 2-color that I'm like so excited to build that I just want to jam Jack Garland and these cards into them. But I would be very surprised if we didn't see these cards come up just like ever. You know, they're not bad by any stretch. They are very well above the curve, and I would expect to see them going forward.
Excellent. Next, we have my favorite summon in all of Final Fantasy and the King of the Dragons, Bahamut himself. This one I've tested quite a bit. Was very excited when I saw it. Always happy for some of the mono art summons. And for me, it's just very straightforward, especially compared to the other Bahamuts we have. Excuse me. If you cast him for 3, he feels great. 5, he feels too expensive. We have other Bahamuts that offer 4 cost, deal 10,000 again, and the Exile is good, but again, not really as relevant these days. So I really like him at 3. I don't like him at 5, but then 3 also limits him to your turn. So like, how good is that really? I like the card, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this one not make the cut.
Yep. I'm pretty much in the same boat. I think this card would have been absolutely insane if it dealt 9,000, but it had the same effect, but it cost 1 less. I would have just been like all over that. Obviously, I think most people would be a 2CP 9k summon, but I don't know. I think there are some ways to kind of like, you know, cheat your mana costs. You know, people have brought up that this triggers Moody, so you can get a CP back. I tend to think that that's not very important. You know, if you have to refund the CP and then spend it on another play, that's usually just not good enough. That we've seen that those, while they're technically true from like a mathematical sense, they don't really fit into how you actually play the game of Final Fantasy, because, you know, it is just a big burden of having to spend the CP afterwards. So yeah, I do think that this is a hard 3 CP. I could definitely see where this kind of card would be useful, like going into the future. If there's, you know, there's those big like multi-Y'shtola type cards that are big, don't take a lot of damage, you know, they can't be dealt with very easily, and I do think that Bahamut works really well into that. But a lot of the cards right now, or one card in particular that I really wish that this card dealt better with, is, you know, the 2CP Rydia.
Mm-hmm.
But it's obviously like way too expensive to kill the 2-drop with like a 3-drop or a 5-drop. And a lot of the times you're just going to be able to cancel the summon with, you know, Mist Dragon or whatever, and you're paying extra tax with this because of the Wind Cecil is on the board, and it just ends up being a little bit too expensive. So I'm not sure how I see this one really lining up in the future. I do think that there's, as a very small thing, there's the 4CP starter deck thing. I don't think that that's really a standard playable card at this point in time, but if it was, then obviously this card works really well with that, because you can just pay 1 to nuke something and deal an extra point of damage to your opponent. So I think that's more of an L3 consideration, especially because we lost the 2CP Fang in L3 for the 13 deck. But yeah, I'm not really sold on this one. I haven't seen it a whole lot in practice. Every time I get to deck building with it, I'm like, yeah, but I could just be playing, you know, like 1CP Kuchulain, or, you know, like any other, or Amaterasu, or any other mix of fire summons, or Brynhildr, you know, any other mix of tried and true fire summons that are a little better than this, I think.
Yeah, well said. Well, sir, it is time for my card, because anyone who's been watching any of my videos for a while knows that, you know, I have a few feelings on EX Burst. Well, looks like maybe the developers do too, because not only this card, but we got a couple cards in this set that at least attempt to address them or deal with them. Nothing that shuts them off entirely, much to my chagrin, but that's okay. So here we have Fel Thanos. If your opponent dares using the X Burst in his presence, they're going to take 3 points of damage, which, while not exact, basically says they can't use them. He also has quite a good break zone trigger where he can do 9k to 2 things, which is awesome. I love the card. I was so happy when I saw it. I like the artwork. The only thing is it actually any good? Where does it go? The deck that would love this the most is Category 13, because that deck I've seen lose many times. 6-cost Leviathan off the top, get rid of the lightning, get rid of that thing. But it can't afford this. Like, if you do the traditional help Vanille play, like you mentioned earlier, they can't afford to put out Fel Thanos. So, like, aggressive decks would want this more than anything, but they can't really afford to put 5 CP into a card that potentially doesn't even do anything. Like, so as much as I like it, I don't know. Is it actually any good? Is it actually going to do anything? And if so, where does it go? How do you see him?
Yeah, I've seen a few people play this card, and a lot of the time it's just been 5 CP, do nothing, and that's kind of what I expected from the card. I agree with the assessment. It's just like if this was like a 2 CP 5k or whatever, like 13 would be like, oh yeah, I'll totally play this card or whatever. But it's not, and because of that, I'm not really sure where I'm supposed to play it. I guess maybe the feeling is if there's a mid-range mirror and you're playing against Soiree or whatever, or maybe you're just playing Mono Fire against Soiree or whatever, and a lot of your stuff is like these haste threats. You don't really have a lot of forwards in the deck because you're usually the control deck, but you kind of have to kill Soiree. So maybe it's useful against that, but then it doesn't really kill the Soiree members if Adel is out. And the 9k, when it gets put into the break zone, is really not very good against Warrior of Light, which is really awkward, is the other thing. Yeah, I kind of struggle to see. I look at the card and I'm like, it's not pack fodder. And it's also an H, so they clearly think it's useful for something. And it is very unique, but like I kind of struggle to see where I actually want to put this in a deck at any given point in time. And maybe something will prove me wrong. Maybe it'll fit perfectly into some deck that I'm just not seeing right now. But at the moment, I don't see anything for that.
Someone show me the light. Show Thanos the way. A card that basically doesn't need the light because we know exactly where it goes is Bomb. There's a lot of generic fire monsters, pink stuff, even that replace themselves. This one just seems tailor-made for Magissa, as a single bomb means you have 2-3 Magissa pings for your next several turns because it just brings the next one right onto the field, which is pretty sweet. Outside of that, I don't know where you do it because you have a lot of other ththings like other bombs and goblins, but and again, in Magissa, seems like it's kind of tailor-made for that.
Yeah. I think that the card is good for Magissa, but I'm not sure if it's better than Hedgehog Pie, which is just something that you're going to have to think about as a Magissa player. And obviously there's far better Magissa players than me out there, but the fact that you have to split the cost of this card up into two payments of 1 instead of 1 payment of 2 is a little weird, and I get that that's like a feature and not like a drawback necessarily. It's not a bug, it's a feature for the card. That being said, I don't know if that is better or worse than Hedgehog Pie, and that's something that like you Magissa players will have to figure out for yourselves. I tend to think that Hedgehog Pie looks a little bit better, although this does delay the extra cost until the next turn. So like, whereas for Hedgehog Pie, a lot of times when you use it as your Magician Enabler, you really only get to do 2 because of just how many cards you have in your hand at that point in time. And it just doesn't make sense to like discard extra cards and play all 3 to the board. It's just not required to keep the Magissa train going. Whereas Bomb, you kind of get to do 1 and then wait a turn and then 1 and then wait a turn, and you kind of get to sparse them out a little bit. That being said, I could totally see that like you have to play 4 bombs in your deck. You draw the 1 bomb that you don't want to draw earlier, and then these are just like dead cards in your deck for a little while. I could see that happening potentially. Yeah, I don't know. Just gonna take time to figure that out. Yeah.
We'll see. Next we have Merilith, one of the 4 chaos we got from Stranger of Paradise. I was really high on this when I first saw it, but having tested it, seen it in action, I actually think it's really bad. Because if you ignore the second effect, it's a 4-cost, deal 8k damage, but there's cards that do that don't have 5,000 power. So to me, it's really all about the second effect, and it just never lined up. Either the person couldn't even get to 7 fire characters where they're already dead, or it also, because haste is such a unique keyword, it basically means you have to have another character that just entered this turn that didn't have haste that you would want to attack. Like, it just never lined up, and if that doesn't line up, there's other, unless you're going for like a Strangers of Paradise thing, there's other cards you can play with higher power for the same effect.
Right. Yeah, I think I agree with the assessment. If you want to give haste a forward, you have your goblins already, and yeah, this does kind of work with goblins to a certain extent. You play your 3 idiot goblins to the board, and then get a different idiot goblin, and then play that to the board, and then maybe you have 7 characters at that point. but like you spend a lot of time to get there, and I'm not sure that this is really the right top end you're looking for. That being said, you don't really have a choice in SOP FFO characters outside of like Neon and Jack and Mono Fire specifically. So if you did want to do that, like, yeah, I mean, I guess maybe there's potentially something there. It's not an unplayable card if you're required to play it for other reasons besides just as a standalone thing. That being said, I highly doubt that Jack is going to be making it in mono, first of all, and that even if you do, like, that's going to be better than other things that you could be doing in standard specifically. In L3, I think that this is maybe looks a little bit better if you were going to build a Mono Fire there, potentially.
Yeah. Next, we have one of my bigger disappointments of the set. This is Mutsuki. This art was revealed long before we ever saw the card, and I thought the art was so cool. I love how big the bomb is that she has and the wink she's giving. And then we saw the card text, and I was just like, that's it? That's all? Like, we have so many cards that do this. There's a Sid FFL card from Opus 8 that has a similar effect when he enters based on your number of backups. We just got a Mont Blanc recently that did the same thing. Like, technically, it's only 3 Type 0 characters, so, like, she could be the one backup and, like, 2 forwards, but just, I don't know, it's just like, really, like, we've got this effect so many times over. So I was just very disappointed that this art was used on that effect. Of course, it can be searched out, like, by Mio and those other ones, but still, I was just kind of like, eh. Yeah. Go ahead.
I thought maybe if the requirement was for 2 Type 0 category characters, then, like, you know, you have Miu and then you play her and she's just immediately an AK, that would be a lot more interesting than, like, what we actually got with this is, like, well, now I have to play an extra Type 0 category character that I'm not searching out and doesn't, like, fit in, and, yeah, it's just, at that point, it's pack fodder. Again, I've said this a lot already. Miu is still in L3. I guess it works there, but no.
Yeah. Well, speaking of pack fodder, if you want a new Fire Monks, oh, you got one. You got a full art one that has Warp 2. Warp 2 for a card with no text. I mean, it has the word brave, but basically no. Why?
Yeah, it looks so cool too. It's really the crime here is that the Ruby Asami arts all look really good this set, and this is by far like the worst one. I don't.
Who knows? Well, if you want more disappointing warp shenanigans, let's show you Rain here, who 3 cost 7k haste that deals 7k on entry. I don't know if you would even play that in this day and age, but it only triggers if it comes in from an ability. And well, it's got Warp 2 again, like. Why?
Yeah.
Like, Warp 1, maybe, but Warp 2 for that?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of talk about around this card when it first came out because like it is just like so weird, and I think that we're like the warp is just so bad, right? Like warping for two for this is just really bad. So because of that, I think that the warp is just kind of like a concession to like, well, here's a way that you can just get it in by itself instead of having to play an enabler. But in reality, we're supposed to play it with Magisa or the warp Delita is what I really think is supposed to be. Is you're supposed to have the warp Delita, and then that brings this in, and this kills the thing, or whatever. It's a fire knight, I guess, like there wasn't really a great rain to search with Gawain.
True.
So maybe there's like some knight player who has been trying to make knights work for like 5 sets or whatever, just like, oh, I see some potential in this card. That's like the only person who's excited to play with it, I'm pretty sure. So. Yeah. It does have haste, that haste is a good keyword. Maybe you play one of it in Magisa, maybe you probably don't, but maybe you do, so.
Mm-hmm. Next we have Rain, and this card is a really good example of how great text can be ruined by name, job, element.
Yeah.
The text is great. Breaker, get a monster of 3 or less in your break zone right to the field. Awesome. But she's in fire, which most monster decks, I don't know if they even play any fire monsters, but they rarely do that. She's World of Final Fantasy, but if you're playing World of Final Fantasy, you're playing the forward Rain, because that's the card that makes the deck work. Yeah, her text is good. I just don't think she fits anywhere because of everything else.
Yeah, I do think there's some experiments back when Crystals first came out into playing Realm, Fire, Water, where you play Realm into Goblin Atomos specifically, and then Goblin gets you new Goblin. Rain could be totally fine there as a way to like get back Atomos from the break zone, or like get just like cycle into a blue worm later. That makes it is Rain like some like Descent from the God card for that deck, the way it would be if it was like Earth for Hippocampus or like Water for Hippocampus. Obviously, that would be insane for those decks, but instead, I think it's just a decent card sometimes in like some very niche situations. So,
fair enough. Well, let's wrap up Fire with Leftia. I kind of blew this card off at first because it's like, whatever. It's another one of these pump your fire damage cards. Doesn't even do anything till damage 3. However, having tested, I will say, the difference between 2,000 and 1,000, I noticed
it's
that
huge,
it's huge. You wouldn't think it's that much, but it really is huge. So her buffing a Squall Cleave to 6k, or something that would be a 5k shot to suddenly a 7k, or a 7k shot to now a 9k shot, quite big. Just like with all the other ones, like the other FFB guy who has to, like, he's a forward, he's another 2 cost, I can't remember his name, but he like makes it so it can't be reduced. Just like with all these, the unfortunate part is she's a small body, so she's got to stick around for that to go. However, if you are doing that fire bump thing, I actually think this one is quite nice. And it affects your summons too, not just like your abilities or your characters. So all that considered, I actually think she's one of the best versions of that effect we have.
Yeah, I was like a little skeptical of how well this card would work when I first saw it, but I've been pretty impressed. From anywhere from like I tried like 2 of them in Mono Fire. That was just like, it was just fine. It was like felt really good to have the 1 CP Ifrit doing like 2 7Ks. Like that felt like insane. Bryn Hilder being 7K was great. Obviously her own ability is good too, and just like like there's like Rain and Ace doing like a ton of damage. Demon dealing 9 or 10k wide instead was really huge. So I think it was really good there. I do think this is one of the better enablers we've ever gotten. Additionally, I've played it outside of like Mono Fire as well. I tried it in the wall deck because I thought it would be really good to get it off of Lena and then get something else, Ferris or whatever. Mm-hmm. So like get Leftia and Lena and Ferris off of Lena, and then Ferris does 3k wide and then deals like 5k pings, and that was really good. So I think anywhere from like a small splash in a deck that can recur it to like a really solid enabler in like Mono Fire, everything is on the table for this card. I've been very impressed. It's not like going to completely blow everything like other cards out of the water. It's not going to like one card your opponent, but it did feel really good whenever I had it on the table, and I think that is worth thinking about.
Awesome. Good fire card to end on. Well, let's cool off with a little ice here. We have Red Mage, some more of that gorgeous Ruby Asami art that you mentioned. I absolutely love the pose that the character is in here. It's very evocative of a Red Mage. This is basically Discount Laswell from Opus 16, one of my favorite cards that unfortunately no one even uses that card anymore. So based off of that assumption alone, I'm like, I can't see this getting play because that one has a better discard effect, plus it's repeatable through other nights, etc. Obviously will be very good in Standard because any just cheap Dolphreeze is always really nice, but yeah, it's fine. I don't know, I guess it's just, if Lastwell isn't playable, I don't see why this is.
I've played a lot of this card. I've tried some turbo discard. I've played the Enemy. This card has been really impressive in my opinion. It's not Thaumaturge. It's not quite as good as Thaumaturge, but I did find, just the cheapest possible character Dolphreeze was just pretty good. Having, we've had like Vincent and stuff like that, and sometimes you're okay with just playing, the Vincent to hold down 2 things or whatever, and you're paying 3 for that. So I figured paying 2 for it in a deck that has an aggressive tilt was just going to be good enough a lot of the time, and I tried it and tested it, and yeah, it's just pretty good. If your deck can afford the slots or not, that's like kind of a slightly different question. I'm not sure that like this just slots into every ice deck. I would not be tempted to play this in like Ice Lightning specifically, because that deck just has so many high quality cards that I don't think that this is a really good use of your slots there. But if you're playing mono ice, like Turbo or like a very aggressive tilted ice deck, I think that this is a card that you should consider playing, because it is just nice to have it again, that very cheap stuff, and it is a little bit easier to trigger the party text than you might expect. I did try it, like I said, Turbo. So I did try it alongside cards like Lastwell, and when it's partying with a Lastwell, it just feels really good. You know, like you're not as worried about killing them really quickly if you're getting a discard and a Dull Freeze out of it. So yeah, I was surprisingly impressed by this card, and I would not be surprised if it came up in lists later. Though whether those decks are good remains to be seen.
Sure. No, I'm glad to hear it outperformed, but what was my expectation at least. Here we have Astos. Captain Crystal gets one on both entry and exit, but he's mainly there for that action ability. Definitely reminiscent of Curry Wazette from, I think that was maybe Opus 17. Yep. Same problems as that card. He is one cheaper, but it's slow. You know, he's got to sit around a whole turn, and you've got to have 3 crystals. That being said, the effect itself is great. I would love to have an Ice Legend that just like did that on entry or something, like just dull their board and then 9K'd all their dull forwards. Like that's and because of the way it's worded too, there is no instance between the dull where they can then like reactivate them. So if it resolves, it just goes through and hits everything. So it's an awesome ability. I struggle to see this seeing competitive play just because of the cost and how slow it is, but a man can dream.
Yeah, this is really slow. I do think it works pretty well if you were tempted to do the Fire Ice DFF stuff with the crystals. I think that there's standalone, this 4CP 8K crystal outlet card that gives you 2 crystals, you know, one when it comes in, when it comes off, is maybe a good... If this is your top end, that I could potentially see that being the right... location for top end. It is nice to get crystals on EX too, obviously, for that deck. So if like you're playing like this and Cyan as your board wipe top end cards, I could potentially see that. The thing is, if you were playing that deck, it might be tempting to do, you know, Jack Garland Neon in that, and then Jack can also search this card too. So however that is going to compete with, you know, the Bard slots, and whether that really makes sense for the crystal deck, I'm not totally sure, but it is something that is again on the table. I really wish that there was a better way to give this card haste, because if this card got haste, it would just be really safe, especially if you could give it haste on your opponent's turn. You know, like obviously it's good to hit your opponent and kill your opponent, but if you could hold this ability up and threaten it on your opponent's turn from the turn that it came in, it would be really great. So if you figure out a good way to haste this card on your opponent's turn, then yeah, I'm pretty into it. That being said, like you said, very slow.
Yeah. Well, the one that's maybe not as slow, this is Ultimisia, nice full art Ice Legend that we have here. So, of course, Verstale is probably something most people thought of, as it deals with 5 cost or more characters to trigger her effect. It's obviously a shoo-in in that deck. Granted, that deck hasn't been seen for a long time. Is this enough to bring it back? Yeah, maybe. Super powerful. I saw someone use it in Verstale, and it was pretty badass to see, like, all right, we'll just take out 5 things and a discard. Obviously works with the other Ice Legend. We'll talk about Griever, that... I wonder if there's, and you can tell me when you have your turn, if there's a certain number you want to hit that you feel like, okay, now it's worth it. Like if she just dull freezes 1 thing in a discard, is that worth it? Does she need to hit 2? Does she need to hit 3? I don't know. She also has text she can't be chosen by summons, which will probably come up every once in a while. Yeah, I don't know. Like I've tested this one, but I've only really tested it off of Griever. I've not really tested it just on its own. So like outside of Griever and outside of Verstale, I don't know how good this is. What do you think?
Right. So I think that I see 3 use cases for the card. The first one is, like you said, off of Griever. And I think off of Griever, I think if obviously you're not paying for the card. So even if you're just removing the Griever that just died, I'm just like okay with that. I think that's a good rate of conversion for the card. Additionally, if you're not doing it off of Griever, like you said, off of Verstale, I think you want to be hitting them. Obviously, you will not have a problem hitting like the maximum most of the time, so it's not really a concern. It's obviously really good there. I don't know if Verstale is good, is the other thing. And then the last one, or I guess I should say, I'm not even sure what color combo Verstale is supposed to be at this point. I don't know if it's Fire Ice anymore. I don't know if it's Wind Ice. I don't know if it's Earth Wind or some 3-color combination, or, you know, whatever. There's a whole lot of options, and I'm not sure which of them is right at any given point in time anymore. The other one is, I think there's been some whispers that I've seen some secret texts, you know, of 6CP Une. It has Renoa. It has that new Shiva that we're gonna talk about the Renoa and the Shiva in a little bit. And I think I potentially underrated those cards as a result, but Yeah, you can't search the Une. I don't know what we're supposed to do to fix that. If you're supposed to play Shenmue or Charlotta or whatever, and just try to get the Une as fast as possible. But obviously, if you're like verstaling and ultimishing and like blinking the card over and over again, that could get out of control pretty fast. I don't know if that's a real deck or not. That's for somebody with a bigger brain than me to figure out, probably. Or maybe I will get to it in, like a month when I finally have time to test other things besides the super competitive decks that I've been going for. But yeah, I do think that there's potential behind the card. I have been pretty impressed with it so far. I don't think it's just like a shoe-in card that you just generically cast and it's something that you really need to have the right deck to support this. You need to be playing Grave or you need to be playing a deck with a lot of 5s. That being said, when I have played it, it's been great.
Excellent. Next, we have Scholar. That's one of the crystal backups we talked about. We'll go past that one. Takiros. Yep. So when I first read this, I completely missed the fact that he triggered off of other forwards entering. I thought it was just him, and I was like, oh my god, this card's terrible. I was like, oh, it can be continuous, which in theory sounds good. I don't know, the whole warp thing, like, are you supposed to play this with Vayne, and you do Kyros and Vayne, and you just have a bunch of stuff warp in, and it does Dolphry's characters, so you can hit the backup line, but unless you're getting that continued value, it's better to play the Red Mage or Lastwell, like the 2 costs that just do that for 1 cheaper.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, I would love to see someone, he is a warrior. Will that matter? I don't know. Because, again, it specifically has to be warp too. It's not like an ability. Because otherwise you could bring him in off the Tyvus. Like, I would be amazed to actually see this show up somewhere. I would love for someone to prove me wrong, to see some kind of warp engine where he just keeps bringing in new people, but that just seems like a pipe dream.
Yeah, I think that this is a little too optimistic, but it does kind of seem like they're trying to take some like light 8 into warping stuff happening. We saw the Anniversary Laguna, which is also a warp card. Maybe there's some stuff going on that potentially makes some waves in L3. Otherwise, it kind of seems more like a limited card to me. It is a warrior, but it doesn't like really have any kind of warrior synergy at all whatsoever, even as like an off-color card. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you trigger this like 3 or 4 times, great card. How realistic is that? Does not seem very realistic to me. I mean, I do want to at least once though, like play this in like just a warp where like you just have all of these like warp 1s and 2s and you just warp like 5 things onto the board at the same time and Kyros just like dull freezes. So you stack it so that Kyros comes in first and then like you resolve all of the warps 1 by 1 and Kyros just like dull freezes your opponent's entire board or whatever. I do think that would be really cool. I do not think it'll happen. But yeah.
Someone show us the light. Here we have Bard, who I actually like quite a bit. It kind of gives me reminiscent of old Gentiana. Like I like that as an ice effect of just like turning off an opponent's abilities. Yeah. Unlike Gentiana, however, she what made her so interesting is because it was a field effect. You would have these instances where like they basically wouldn't have a chance to react or to do the thing they wanted to do. Whereas Bard, because he creates a stack, he has to target. They can use whatever in response to it. Yeah, obviously twice as expensive as Porum. Granted, Porum could only hit 5 or less, but I mean, there are many 6 costs that you even want to hit. Like, if you hit a Griever with this and he has his abilities online, he's just going to do it in response anyway. So, I don't know. It's a neat idea, but I'll be surprised if this shows up.
Yeah, I think this is a case of like a good ability that we've seen. That this ability is just like really good on Porum, but the card is just too expensive to really justify it seeing play. Obviously, if this was just a on curve 2CP 5K, we would be a lot more excited about having that option available in Ice, but it's not, so we aren't.
Yep, 4 is just too much. Well, we talked about him a lot. Let's bring out our other Ice legend. This is Griever. So this is another one that my opinion has shifted on quite a bit from when I first read it versus having seen it. I've played with it myself a lot. I've seen people play it, and I've seen both extremes of this card. I have seen it jammed out early, and I've seen people support it with a Rosa or a Sage or something that reactivates it, because as people have noticed, I'm sure, there's no limit to the amount of times you can do it. And I've seen people discard, reactivate, discard again, your turn, reactivate, discard, and you're just like, oh my god, this card is busted. This is the best ice legend I've ever seen. And then if you dare deal with the thing, he goes and gets any witch, which I saw someone get a Matoyo with him. But Matoyo on the backup line, get the Griever back, slap it back out there. Obviously, all the Ultimishas, holy moly. However, I've also drawn him later in the game when I'm dying, and I pay 6 for a card that can't do anything, and they push it out of the way with their own Dull Freeze, or they blank it, or they bounce it, or whatever, and I'm like, well, I just paid 6 for absolutely nothing. So he kind of actually honestly reminds me of Neo X Death a lot, in that I think he's a lot stronger the sooner you get him out. I think the later in the game it is, if he comes down, he's a lot less scary, but if you can get him down early and they can't do anything, like, card puts in some work, and the free removal, like if they attack, he can block on the stack. Dull Break is insane. If you're facing this card, here's a little advice: just kill it. Like, whatever witch they pull out is going to be way less worse than if you let this guy stick around. So tell me about Griever, Jared.
Yeah, no, that basically lines up exactly with my experiences. Like, if you slam this card on turn 1, it's pretty good. It's like, I think the Neo X Death is a very apt example. Like, this card it has enough synergy cards usually alongside it that it tends to be pretty oppressive if it stays, whether it's mono or, like you said, you can reactivate it with Rosa Sage. I don't know if Ice Water is exactly where I would be with the card, but even if it's like mono or whatever, like, the card compounds really, really quickly when it gets when it's basically Gesper. When it's basically just like a big Gesper that is difficult to kill and works like that, and it threatens to bring out Ultimishia when it dies, it can be kind of like that Neo X stuff, like damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. You just kind of have to bite the bullet. Again, like you said, it also just does nothing sometimes, and it's very frustrating to have this card get bounced, especially is really like the worst. Like, if you are playing an aggressive deck and you're like Grievering or whatever, and you hit 60p Leviathan and it's bounced, you're just like, well, the game is over. Like, it is a card that is very, very volatile, very, very high variance with the card when you're playing with it. And I think the more you try to support it, the greater you will be rewarded for running the card. Is that like a top tier competitive strategy? I do not know. Like, it's just not something that we have figured out yet.
Very good, very good. Here we have Shiva. I got to test this card. Now, to be fair, I only tested it in Mono Ice. I didn't even think about it with something like an Une, like you said, where you just want to cast anything and then you can benefit from recasting. Yeah. Casting it in just Mono Ice, because you have to remove ice cards, I thought, it was neat. It let me stall out a game for probably like 5 turns longer than it should have gone on, because I just kept recurring the Shiva and I just kept Dull Freezing. Yeah. Granted, I couldn't win that game because I was just stalling forever and trying not to lose, but it did technically work. That being said, like, just 1 cost on a summon without a body for a single Dull Freeze. Yeah, it's a character. I don't know. It's still not the... I guess I'm always waiting for that ice summon that's like, this is the one. And this one's cool, no pun intended, but it's certainly not like the ice summon. I'm sure it's very strong if you combine it with something like an Une where you can like abuse it, basically. Go ahead.
Yeah. I've had a good experience with this card in like aggressive ice strategies. Like, you kind of don't want to pay... You don't always want to commit to the board and pay up front to Dull Freeze a character against, Mono Wind, or I guess against Wall specifically, where there's that threat of Shantoto, right? Sometimes Red Mage is the right card for the job, sometimes it's not. And this card is really good at being really annoying. I think the better you understand what your opponent is going to do at any given point in the game, especially the next turn, the better you can abuse this card, because it is just so cheap. Like that once it is 1 CP and it doesn't spend the card a lot of the time. So I think for the most part, like starting on like turn 2 in aggressive ice decks where you're playing like a lot of cards pretty early, this card is basically just it turns any backup into a Cisne, I guess is the best way to think about it. And when you're using it like that in an aggressive ice deck, that can be like really annoying really quickly for a control deck to play against. And I do think that that's valuable. I don't know if this is always worth a deck slot in like a competitive ice deck, and it is kind of really annoying that it competes with that it kind of wants to remove ice cards from your break zone that doesn't really work with the other Shiva, which is so frustrating because it feels like they want us to be going in the same direction with it. But I do think that this card is, like I said, it's a card that gets better the better understanding you have of what your opponent is going to do over the next like 2 turns. And I do expect this card to be like the bane of control play, like especially wall players' existence. Like I'm just never going to be able to cast my wall, basically, is what this card says. And I do think that that is something that is valuable for ice-based aggro going forward.
Good assessment. Good assessment. Here we have Squall, one of our many new WAF cards. He basically is designed so that he's always going to win in combat between the first strike and his 3k to a blocking forward. And then the discard on attack is very good. My evaluation of him, because I've played the Fire Ice WAF deck, I've tested it quite a bit, and my evaluation of him is legit based on Rain. If he has haste and Rain's on the field, he's great. If he doesn't have haste and you have to pay 3 for a card that basically just sits there, and he can't use his action ability defensively. Like if he could use it when he was blocking, I'd like it a lot more, but it's only when someone blocks him. So with Rain, awesome. I love him. Without Rain, too expensive. Doesn't do anything. What do you think?
Yep. That lines up with my experience. I tried this because we'll talk about it in a bit when I talk about Snow, but I think that the WAF package, or the Snow specifically, is just good in Mono Ice. Like, it's just good. So I tried this card because I also, like, you just might as well.
Yeah.
Like, it kind of fits in with the same text, but yeah. It didn't have haste, and so it just wasn't very good, I don't think. So like exactly like you said. If you have Rain on the board, the card is just awesome. If you don't, the card is just kind of bad, I think.
So find your Rains. Well, you mentioned Snow. Snow, come on down. This card, I don't know how, I completely missed the fact that he dull freezes a character on attack. I thought he was just like a body. And so I saw my friend, I actually sent him my list to test and watched him. And he did like turn 1, like just put down Loose or Rorik or just some like cheap backup, put out the Snow, immediately attacked and dull froze. I was like, oh my gosh. Like I didn't realize it came online that simply. It counts itself, just needs one other. Immediate haste, go in. I was like, holy moly. So like Snow has definitely been like the standout new WAF card for me just because of how aggressive he can be. And then at damage 3, he gets 3k, which nothing amazing, but turns him into an 8k, which is fine. So yeah, he's the guy. He's my favorite new of the WAF cards.
Yeah, this card is awesome. I played it again in Mono Ice. You just play, Sid WAF for the tutor, the girl who forgot her name. There's like a plethora of cards that you can play, and any of them will turn them on. And this card is just awesome. Yeah, like I think that this card is great. Obviously awesome in the WAF deck. He's just online on like turn 1 or whatever. I think he's pretty good in any aggressive ice deck that you're willing to put together as well. And I've just been really impressed with the card. I thought when I first read the card, I was like, he gets haste. But Rain already gives your guys haste. Why did you need that? But then I was like, oh my god, this is so much better because he has haste. Like, I didn't really consider the full implications of just like, oh yeah, he's just online on turn 1 and you really have to worry about it. It's like not a big deal. Yeah. Great card. I was very impressed.
Fantastic. But is this a great card? This is Setzer. Always got to go with the gambler theme. Another mono art. One of my favorite characters from 6. So when I first read this, I thought it was absolutely awful. I was like, 3 CP. He's only a 5k. He kind of has the Zidane effect, except he doesn't, because unlike Zidane or like Lonnie, where you can like cast it whenever, he's got to be on the field. So if he gets removed, you can't actually use those cards. And I was like, how would you even have the CP to cast this thing? I was like, that's just going to be too expensive. Like you'd have to be playing Ice Wind. And then I started thinking about it in Ice Wind. And then I saw people, and I was like, Asura may get you back Luso and all those babies, but you don't really have a way to get back the Lock or the Sid Hayes, maybe other than Shantoto. Right. So I was like, okay, so now you have a way to recur those cards. So I have seen some people try him in Icewind. I do think he's basically built for that deck. I can't imagine what other deck could really afford to pay him and then pay whatever it is he's removing and hoping he sticks around. But in that deck, now granted, that deck's already really tight on slots, so is he going to replace other stuff? I don't know, but being able to pull back a Lock or a Sid Hayes, that sounds like a good idea to me. So for that deck alone, I give him a thumbs up.
Yep, I mostly agree. I don't think somebody said that this card is just going to go into the 6 turbo deck, and I was just like, "What are you talking about? Like, there's no way. There's no way. Like, we have the best Setzer for that deck already. You know, I don't think it's particularly good for that deck. I won't go further than that. But in Icewind, I don't know like how many you play. I don't know if you like split it between Shantoto or not, but I'm pretty sure you play at least one, if not two, of these guys, and maybe just completely quit Shantoto altogether. Because, not gonna lie, a lot of the time when I'm playing Icewind, my opponent has a hand. Like, you just don't have enough discard stuff to really do it. And you end up paying 4 for the Shantoto, and sometimes you just kind of, like, you just swallow it. You know, you have to pay 4 for the card. You need some element of recursion. I think that this is just a strict upgrade to that. You know, like, yeah, your opponent's gonna kill it a lot of the time. One of your things is gonna get removed. Whatever. You know, like, it's just totally fine. Additionally, if I don't know if we're ever going to do this again, but we used to play Gestalian Emperor Sid in Icewind because it searched lock. Maybe, you know, in Search Setzer, maybe you play it again, maybe you don't. I don't know for sure. I don't know if we'll ever go back to that sort of where you actually just play ice backups in the deck instead of just like searching it off of Northshaw and only playing like 2 in the whole deck. You know, I don't know if we're going to do that again or not, but that is a potential upside there. Additionally, I did find, you know, like Asura recurs Luso, you know, in Azana. We've talked about that a lot. But like, you really don't want to use Asura to do that a lot of the time. Usually, a lot of the time you have to use Asura to do that, and that is kind of like a downside, right? You would really rather be generating CP with the Asura a lot of the time, and so I tend to think that this is just a bet, like a forward into forward recursion for Luso and the cheapies is just going to be better. And then the fact that you can also get Sid Hayes is just like the cherry on top. You know, it's really what you really want to do, and so maybe this opens avenues where like we don't actually even play 3 lock anymore, because a lot of times lock isn't even really that good until way later in the game, you know, until you're already like winning a lot of the time. So maybe this opens avenues for us to only play 2 lock or stuff like that. And yeah, I do think that this is a pretty significant upgrade to Shantoto in that regard. Again, I don't know if you're going to split it or what, because the body on Shantoto is significantly better, but yeah, it's great for that deck, I think.
I like your comparison with the Shantoto. They're really good. All right, Setzer, show us the light. Unlike your next 6 partner, this is Terra. Man, I don't know what it is about every Terra that has to be like, I get it, she's an Esper and she likes summons, and it's like every Terra ever has got to be. And you know what? Since it's a WAF card, which means, again, it could benefit from Rain, the haste, the ping. If it searched for just like any summons that were different, I could really like it because, I could go get Amaterasu. Like, that's pretty cool. Right. But it has to be ice summons. Like, and again, there's not really any great ice summon. I don't know. Like, and it's expensive at 5. Yeah, not digging this one.
Yeah, I was definitely poo-poo on the card until somebody pointed out that, like, well, if you bounce this with Une, like, it searches your summon.
That's true.
So, like, if you have an Une, like, just hear me out, that you already have the Une on the board, you know? Like, don't worry about how I got there. You play the Terra, you search for the 1 CP Shiva and whatever other card you want to put in your deck. I don't know, maybe it's the 4 CP Shiva. That card is free, after all. You know, you can kind of trigger that immediately. You know, dull freeze something, go get 2 more summons, and it kind of compounds really quickly. So I guess if you were just going to play Mono Ice Shiva, I know the other Terra is already really good for that deck, which is pretty frustrating. But this one does have an S ability, so there is that, and you know, it does fit in with the Une identity, the Mono Ice, and you know that also works with, you know, the Ultimecia. This is a 5 or higher. You know, it's it gets hit off of Verstale, so. I'm not saying that deck is good, but if you were going to play that deck and you were going to play Une, then hey, this seems like a shoe-in that deck specifically. So I would be excited to see it there.
You made a good case for it. All right, get that Une on the field. Who cares how it got there? Next, we have The Girl Who Forgot Her Name, which is, of course, just a 1-to-1 copy from the Earth version so long ago, but this is just the Ice version. Yep. You know what's funny? As your Discord, you guys use the Seraphy as the image. But I didn't realize you can't actually see it on the non-full art version very well. So I didn't even realize it was there. So when I saw that, I was like, where did they get that Seraphy from? And I was like, oh, it's from the full art. So great full art on this card.
Yeah. Actually, they're putting out sleeves for Meijin Sen this season,
Oh, really?
and it's a little bit zoomed out, so you can actually get a better picture
nice.
that doesn't have the text on their face and everything. That's how I got that one.
That's great. Yeah, and Tama looking over at the teacup, like really great art. And obviously the effect's just very straightforward. If you're playing the ice version of WAF, you're gonna slap this in there because it not only counts towards the characters, it searches out probably your rain, but whatever it is you want to look for. So yeah, just all around solid card.
Yep, played it in mono ice to search the snow, just as my only 2 off cards, just like 3 of this card, 3 of the snow, and it was just good. Yeah, pretty happy with it.
That's a good combo. Next we have Fomor, who's clearly intended to be like, if they've got a dull forward, you enter, hit it for 4, you immediately sacrifice him, hit it for essentially 8. If they're down, 2 or less, you'll hit it for 11 total, which is fine. It's just, because it's a monster, it's not like a summon, so you can only do it on your turn. I don't know, it's not that anything reads bad. I guess just these whole dull ping effects I haven't been into for quite a while, especially when they're not at instant speed. Like the instant speed ones only feel so these days, so I'm definitely not into one where it's like I gotta do it as main phase. What do you think?
I would be a little more excited if the first ability had the same exact text as the bottom ability, where the enter the field also did 7k. If they had, then I'd be like, okay, well, at least maybe I can make a case for the card. It can kill 2 7ks sometimes, but 4k is not dealing damage to anything, so it's just just doesn't matter. Yeah, I think this one was designed to be pack fodder specifically, so
yeah. They needed an ice monster, so they printed an ice monster, as you would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Here we have Minwu. This is my buddy Daniel. Spoiler. I do like the action ability. Again, one of those kind of, okay, I really need to get something out of the way. Emergency, Dole freeze it. It's worth losing a backup for that. As far as his entry, it's really good if you go second, they put down their first backup, their Nordstalin, and then you put Minwu down and freeze it. Generally, freezing backups is better the earlier in the game you do it. Later in the game, It tends not to matter as much. One thing to be cautious of, it is a mandatory choose, so if you're going first, if you put this down first, you freeze your own Minwu, so be mindful of that. Don't freeze your own Minwu. Other than that, it is not a Dolan freeze, though. I guess maybe that probably would have been too strong, but yeah, he's fine. I don't know if you're going to find slots for him, but he's fine.
Yeah, somebody brought up a pretty interesting point. It's if you just build a deck that's prepared to go second in 2-deck format. I think it's NATO on my team actually brought this up, that if you just build a deck that's prepared to go second in 2-deck format, a lot of these cards suddenly increase in value, right? On this controlling ice side. This card is very clearly going to see play in L3 and Limited. It's obviously going to be awesome in those formats, but in Standard, I think it's pretty limited to that exact situation. If you were building an ice deck that just wanted to go second and capitalize on going second, then this would be a great card to consider for that. Is that good? I don't know. It's a nice effect to be able to freeze on a character on a backup like this, but it's not searchable, which kind of reduces the playability. Doesn't have multiplayer, which again reduces playability, and in that regard, it's not really a card that you're ever going to be counting on for that effect.
Yeah, that's fair. Next, we have the hidden card from the card browser. This is Ishtola. Luckily, I was able to snatch a picture of her. Yeah, so this is one I got to test. I had pretty high hopes for this card because, again, I always thought in those ice discard decks, well, I can get their hand empty, but then how do I get rid of their forwards? How do I get them off the board?
Right.
This seemed like a good form of removal. I do like that it gets haste if they've got a low hand, or I think it's if they got a low hand size. And it was fine. I don't know what I wanted from it. It didn't quite live up to that. It was surprisingly difficult to always hit 9k for some reason. Sometimes I'd get them down to 1 in hand through the Scale Toad, and I just couldn't get that last card out of their hand. And so then it just shot for 8, which is also fine, but I don't know. I really wanted the 9. It's one of those weird cards where it's there was nothing wrong with it, and I think I would keep trying it and using it, but I also wasn't oh wow, this is the removal ice has been waiting for. I was kind of just it was okay. Did you get to test her at all?
Yeah, I have not tested her in fair decks, I guess, but I did play a lot of DFF, and this card is pretty prominently featured in Ice Lightning at our nationals, and in that deck, it's just really good. I think the more aggressively tilted or the more discard effects that you have in your deck, the better this is. And that sounds pretty straightforward, but I think until you really play with the card, it's pretty difficult to like fully comprehend exactly how oppressive this is. I think not having to hit Dole is the best text on this card by far. Like, we would have some janky ways that we would consider playing this card, even if it didn't have haste. But if it had to hit Dole and it still had haste, I think this card would be like way less potent than it is. So yeah, I think if you play a really aggressive version of Ice, this card is just like a slam dunk in terms of having a good removal option. And even if you don't, if you play a lot of hand death or discard effects, like in Ice Lightning specifically, I think that this card is also really good there. Also, I did have a lot of things come up. Obviously, you'll notice that it's weird that it's an Ice Y'shtola. I did have a lot of things come up where I was playing against other Scion decks, and their Y'shtola's S ability not killing my Y'shtola was really relevant, which sounds so stupid, right? Yeah. But yeah, actually, it was pretty important. So.
A nice little use case there. I'm glad you mentioned the non-dull on her damage, because that's easily the best part, and it's going to factor into this next card we talk about, which is Reaper, and that so when he enters, you get one of two effects: dull 4 to 3 cost or less, break it, or they discard. Well, I don't think the discard is worth it, because we have cards that for 2 discard a cards and that are also like 5k, so why would I pay 1 extra for that? So for me, the main effect I would play this for is the dull 3 cost break it, which again is like, I don't know, we have monsters that do that now, we have other that's not really unique. I think the uniqueness is supposed to be he's modal, like you get a choice, but again, to me, we have cards that discard for cheaper, so I don't really even view that as an option. Maybe I'm looking at the card the wrong way, but that's just how I see it. So I tested him out. He was fine. I didn't hate it, but there were also plenty of times it's like, I'll just pitch him for CP. I'd rather play like the Y'shtola or something else. So what do you think?
Yeah, like you said, if this card hit active, I would be a lot more into it, because then it would be a very clear answer to Rydia, and I think that is something that, like, Ice is pretty lacking right now. Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of the stuff that is good at hitting Rydia, so like Zalera, the Shiva that breaks Dole 2s, like, they just, if they know that the card is in the deck, which is not a guarantee, but especially at higher level competitive events, it's just something that happens, they just never attack with the Rydia, and you're stuck with this removal in hand that just doesn't do anything. Mm-hmm. I would be a lot more interested in the card if it worked in that use case, but it simply doesn't. So I think that this card is not quite there. It's not quite good enough to be an aggressive mono ice card either. Sometimes if you just want to play like a lot of Terras, a lot of like the 3CP Sarahs, 3CP discard a card, this is a useful card, but I think that Ice is very clearly leaning towards character dull freeze is where the aggressive stat line is meant to be played right now. So like I do tend to think that just Red Mage is probably just better than this card a lot of time, as painful as that probably is. So I've not had a particularly good experience with this one.
We'll see what you think about our next card. This is Renoa. Fooled everybody into thinking this was a full art, wherever that image came from originally. People are like, oh my god, I'm going to pull that in my pack, and I'm just going to be totally hosed. This one is, so this isn't my type of card, so maybe you can give me more insight, because it's just, it's too situational for me, because it means, okay, I've got to have a summon in the break zone, and then I'm going to want to cast it later. But you did mention something like an Une or some other card that can really take advantage of that. So I'm going to actually just pass it over to you, because I don't really know what to think about this card. Tell me about Renoa.
Yeah, so this card is like just kind of like stocks up your summon, basically, so that it can't be discarded from your hand or whatever, and you can kind of do it at any time, which is fine, I suppose, but I don't think it's like, there's this thing about like backups that are 3 CP or higher and don't bring the card to your hand. It is that until you cast that summon is just kind of lost CP. You've just played a 3 CP backup that does nothing. So it's really hard to slot these kinds of cards into your deck, because backup lineups are just, they can be so much better than that. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with this card. It's just that there are very few summons in the game that I'm ever going to remove with Renoa and then immediately spend on something and be happy about that exchange. And I think that the only one where that is really the case is like Asura, right? Because it just immediately turns it back into CP. So I think in the case that you remove Asura with a card and then immediately cast Asura, I'm pretty happy playing the card. Is that like a backup that I'm going to slot into my deck? Probably not. Yeah. So I tend to think that the card is probably not very good. It is really unique and it's really cool. And in that one case where it works out really well, it is going to be very, very CP efficient. And I think it's really good for that specific use case. But it's not just like it gets me a summon back. It doesn't do that. But it makes you spend more CP on a summon later in the game. And that is a pretty significant tempo loss. And I don't think it's good enough in standard for that kind of thing.
Good breakdown. Next we have Lufenian. This one's interesting. So it gives me callbacks to one of my favorite backups in the game, which is Opus 5 Edward. Nice mono backup. It was a 3-cost, made a discard on entry. And so I thought, well, this is technically cheaper Edward, but obviously it has the restriction they want you to play it early. So it's almost built into the text that like, hey, this is a crazy big payoff. A 2 CP backup that causes a discard. Yeah. There is nothing else that has done that before. So when it has lined up, and it has, it felt good, but it didn't feel insane. And I think they wanted it to feel insane. But my opponent was just like, oh, okay, well, get rid of that. And, and they just went on with their day.
Yeah.
And I started to think like, I guess really the thing that made Edward so potent wasn't the discard. It was Silent Verse. It was also, I'm threatening to cancel any summon you now have. So because of that, like, again, I didn't dislike this card, but it just didn't feel as insane as I think they wanted me to feel. And then the obvious awful downside that unless it is the first backup you play, it doesn't do anything. And granted, it is 2 CP, so it's not bad to just have a 2 CP backup, but just, I wonder if they could have been a little more lenient, like if it was the second backup as well, or the third, or I don't know when the cutoff should have been, but was fine. Felt good when I played it, but it didn't feel as insane as I'd hoped it did.
Yep, I had pretty similar stuff. I've had a lot of this being used again. I've been on the other side of the table of this more than I've been on that I've been playing it myself. When I played it in mono ice, I always felt like it was just not my first. It was never my first backup. And I played lists where I played 3 of this and 3 Kazusa, and it's just like, okay, even when I did that, half the time it was just dead, and I never wanted to play a second one. So I don't know. I think that the card is just not very good. It is so mean that they put multi-playable on this card. It just feels so. I'm just like, oh man, this sucks. Maybe there's some
to touch on that design. That's just weird that you almost want to play 3 of it because you want to see it early, but then all the extra copies are automatically dead, even though you can play multiple copies. Yeah, I don't know. That's so weird.
I don't know. Well, it feels really teasing, is I guess the way that I would put it. And yeah, I don't know. I wasn't really happy putting this in my deck. I was almost always happier drawing Chronos, or just Kazusa was just the same. I was just playing my hand, and so Kazusa was exactly the same thing as Lufenian. Or I had a hand that I wanted to keep, and I just played Chronos instead, and Chronos did the same thing because I already had 2 forwards and I was playing an aggressive ice deck. Maybe, I could totally see an argument where you just, you're just supposed to play all of them. I could totally see that. Mm-hmm. But, I just, the more backups you put in the deck, the worse the card gets. So, you just are supposed to have, diminishing returns. And I guess if you really, really value having this kind of effect and doing, all of it, then, yeah, I can totally see, you're not supposed to do it. But man, it just feels bad. I've never, played with a card that just feels so bad to have in your deck as this card. Even if it's good when it works. So, I don't know.
Weird card.
I don't know.
Weird card. Next, we have the Rursan Arbiter. I have a lot of thoughts about this one, and I have gotten to test it, and I'm very curious on your feelings on this, because at first I was like, obviously it is Sid Alstein, given that first text. It's between the Yatsuyu was the other one. They have these cards that are the new Sid Alstein, but none of them are 9K like Sid Alstein. They're all 5 cost like Sid Alstein. And this one doesn't have any EX burst, but it's a repeatable ability. And so I kind of envision this world of oh my God, you can just lock someone out of the game with this. You empty their hand, you put them down, you break it. They're top decking, and you're a discard deck, so you're constantly emptying your hand, and then you break it, and you break it, and you break it, and by the end of the game, he's holding up like 10 skulls of the bodies he's completely destroyed over the game.
Yeah.
It's like brilliant. And in practice, there was one game I saw that went that way. I was like, wow, that's pretty good. There was another game I was playing against Scions. I broke whatever forward, was like, this is amazing. They're in top deck mode. They drew Ally safe for turn, revive Y'shtola. Okay, he's dead. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, he didn't last as long as I thought he did. So, again, one of these cards that, like, I don't think there's anything bad text, but at least, and maybe I just had bad luck. Maybe in, like, true competitive play, maybe he would really show his colors, but it just, I don't know. I didn't ever get that dream of, like, he stuck around for 5 turns and they just could never recover because I could break anything. Yeah. And again, maybe that was just bad luck on my part. So I like him and I can see his potential, but I don't know. Clearly, I'm also, like, some part of me is kind of held back by him. Maybe the 5 just felt expensive. Maybe there's already so many 5s, like Physalis and Griever and Orphan, and I'm like, I got to dedicate slots to them. I don't know. Jared, help me. Help me focus my thoughts here. What's going on with this card?
Yeah, I kind of have a similar experience too, though. It's like, it reads really good. It is literally Sid Alstein. Like, it's the character is the same. So there's that. Which is really good, and like having a repeatable version of Sid Alstein is something that, like Ice Lightning and like Mono Ice were looking at for like a really long time, and this does fill the shoes. And I was really expecting this card to just, really come out in spades and shine. And then I played it, and I was like, whenever I drew it, I was like, I just don't want it. Like, it just doesn't matter. I would be more interested in freezing backups or discarding cards at that point in time. And it's like, I kind of thought that it was like a way for us to get away from Fissalis, because I think that card is actually just way worse than a lot of people think it is.
Yeah, agreed.
But yeah, after playing it, I'm not really sure where I'm supposed to be on it. If there is a nice controlling ice deck that is like slow and can consistently keep people on 0 cards, like a Scale Toad deck that also has additional like options, then it feels like this should be a slam dunk for the deck.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just because I've been playing so many like mid-range and aggressive ice decks. This card just doesn't feel like it does anything for me. Maybe this card is just like a card that needs to be played in like Ice Earth specifically and doesn't work in anything else, because I tried it in Ice Lightning, not very good. I tried it in Mono Ice, not very good. So I don't know. That's really all I have to make of it, I think.
Weird. When I wonder, I've talked about like discard in general. I have a video on my channel about that, and I wonder if it's kind of the weird nature of discard, where sometimes, by the very nature of them being stuck in a top deck, you've already won, so you don't actually even need a card like this because they can't do anything. They're stuck in top deck. So maybe it has something to do with that. I don't know. It's weird. Gave me a very weird feeling that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we've got for ice. Let's see what wind has in store for us here. We have Evil Weapon, starting off with a wind monster. And nothing really stands out to me about this card other than it gives you a crystal. I mean, it's obviously a 4K ping. Yeah. I don't know, like some wind decks don't even run Typhon anymore. Like, they're usually running Evray and what's his name? Atomos. Like, is there any place for this guy? He kind of just seems like filler to me.
No, I mostly agree. It's just kind of like one of those concessions they make for, limited and to a lesser extent L3. It's like, well, we have to have ways to make crystals. So yeah. I guess they put that here for that.
Fair enough. All right, next we have Vaughn. We have a nice full art here by Ryomata Ito. Is that correct? Yeah.
Ryoma.
Yeah, Ryoma. Yeah, so one of these full arts. So we have this whole new set of Sky Pirates, and I'll just say it right now that none of these really work with the old Sky Pirates, so you probably shouldn't try to combine them. I definitely looked at them at first like, well, why would I play these over the old ones? They're clearly just meant to be a different thing. And this is one of those weird cards that, like, there's technically nothing wrong with it. If you are doing what Wynn does, you will easily get to 7 characters, so he should be free, especially with the monsters. You want to get to 5 backups, etc. But his text basically amounts to the Luso effect, which is just if you cast 3, draw a card. So do you want that same effect, but on just a free 9K body? I don't know. I was actually kind of interested in what Alex Hancock wrote on his review of Vaughn. Is like, well, if Wind has any problems, it's early game where, that's when it's most vulnerable. This doesn't really do anything about that. Maybe it doesn't need to. I don't know. I'm kind of just on this card. Again, it's one of those, there's nothing wrong with it, but like Wind is already so tight on slots as is. Are you going to take something out for this? What do you think?
Yeah, I in general quite like this card. I think it's more a matter like, does your deck have the slots to run it? Are you running? And obviously, I guess I should preface everything by saying I'm pretty sure that this card is only fitting in Mono Wind and it's not ever going to fit in Ice Wind. But if you are playing Mono, then it does have a good job for the Balthier, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I know some people are or not believing in the Balthier as much, but in terms of Van just by himself, if he is Mono Wind is obviously where he's going to be the most powerful. You have to be playing Mono Wind cast. In that deck, like, how powerful is he? I don't think he, like, completely, like, revolutionizes the archetype or anything, but I do think, like, having more cantrips is something that people are underrating a little bit, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit more with Riku and Nini in a minute, too, but I think the more cantrips you run, the easier it is to get to those Luso numbers, and one of the big problems was, like, one of your best ways to get up to the 7 cast was to play a Luso on like 3, and then you have to bounce it, and that kind of opens up these weird timing windows where if your opponent has interaction, you don't end up getting to go to the full 7 cast. So having cards that can kind of be interspersed until you get to the 7 cast is really, really important for Luso a lot of the time, I think. So I think that this card works pretty well. I think we're going to talk about it a little bit with the Pandemonium. Pandemonium can add this card as well, which is a big boost for it. It has the job Skyfire for the Balthier, obviously, so you can get rid of excess copies. So I don't know how many you run, but I do think that the card is a little bit better than what Alex specifically was rating it. I do think that I'm most of the time just pretty happy if I can get this out on turn 3 for even 1 to 2 costs. It is a pretty big body after all,
True.
And those are kind of important for the deck. So. I'm a little bit higher on this card than some other people, but only time will tell if Mono Wind is even the right place to be for cast at this point.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the 1 and 2 cost. I'm always curious on cards like this. Like, okay, how low do you have to get it before you're like, I'm willing to cast it at that point, other than obviously.
Yeah, I think you're mostly willing to, if it costs 1 card from hand to cast it, then it just replenishes the card in hand. So it's just like a free, like old Barts, like the Opus 1 Barts, But you don't have to have 5 backups necessarily, right? So if you have, cards like... This makes us, again, think a little bit more about cards like Ochu. Things that we haven't played for a long time, We've been... most of our cantrips and, like, our reactivation has been, like, Rosa and Asura and stuff like that. And we've kind of moved past Ochu, but, like, the Balthier and cards like this kind of reward you for having those... whatever, like, do nothing bodies on the board that kind of come alive a little bit later by making the Von cheaper. So I think it's deceptively better than what most people are thinking about it. It just kind of changes the way you're building the Mono Wind, I think.
Awesome. Well, it's got some good arts. I hope we get to see Von show up. Card we will likely see. This is Viera. It definitely reminds me of Loporrit from last set. Very similar standard unit. Does a similar thing. This one, it technically looks at the top 2 as opposed to, I think, Loporrit drew you 2 and then you put 1 back. So not 100% the same, but similar with an action ability that just repeats the entry effect. It's just kind of one of those generically good cards. The only thing is I don't know where it goes. I don't think it has a particular outright home that I'm seeing, because cards this generic tend to just be, well, you could kind of put in anything. Windfire, slap a Viera in there, Wind Ice, I don't know, maybe. But I also know some of those cast focused decks do have certain backups they're looking for, so that's kind of my only real thing to say about Viera is I just don't know where it goes, but it's so generically strong, I'd be surprised to not see it show up.
Yeah, I think for especially Mono Wind and Ice Wind and the Cast Wind decks in particular, they have a very, very specific set of backups that they want to get. And I'm not sure that this one makes the cut, given that it's just a standard unit. There's no job search or any particular synergies that it has. However, you're right. Again, the specs are so high. I think it doesn't do the hand filtering. So if you have specific cards that you want to put back in the deck or whatever, obviously Loporrit is better than that. But this card has an on-par filtering effect, and the active is way better than Loporrit's active. Mm-hmm. You can use it on your opponent's turn. It only costs 1. It is way better. So in that regard, I do agree that this card is quite strong. again, I also think, yeah, there's no like clear home for it. A lot of these Wind X decks have their backups pretty much set out for them, and so the bar is a lot higher on a Wind backup to be good than it is on a Water backup, because Water backups are generally not very good.
Yeah.
Or the ones that are just like so, like Sarah or whatever, are just like so good that it doesn't really matter what your other Water backups are. Again, we have this whole influx of these 3 CP backups that work well with the 7-cost Warrior of Light that came out this set. So
Yep.
I think maybe if there's like a Wind shell that Warrior of Light works in, then this could be one of the go-to cards to slam into that deck. It obviously works alongside Princess Goblin, which we're going to talk about in a little bit too, in that shell. So there could be something there. I'm not totally sure, but I would be very surprised if this card like just didn't see play at any point in the game. That would be unthinkable. So
fully agreed. So they remembered Dancers was a thing, kind of. I mean, it's basically a black belt, though. Like, its biggest claim to fame is it can become free, obviously cheaper with other Dancers, and then it reactivates too. Presumably, if they're backups, you didn't pay anything. But then it has no text, so basically it only is good if you have Lilithset or Mayakov. I haven't seen Dancers since Opus 15, maybe 16, so this seems pretty generic to me. I don't think this fixes anything they were looking for. What do you think?
Or, maybe there's a critical mass of like Dancer forwards. Like at some point you just have like so many playable Dancers, because a lot of them are not playable.
Fair.
Maybe at some point you have so many playables that it actually just becomes like an okay like Dragoons style tier 3 or whatever deck. That being said, this one does have like one claim to fame, I think, and it's that you only really need the backups to turn on the top ability.
True.
So you can play like Pinello, like some of the other okay Dancer backups that are just like semi-functional cards. And then if you have Tilica, this card kind of becomes like -1 CP. There could be some kind of loop shenanigans going on there. I think there's nothing that's really doing that is outshining the Summoner loop that we already know exists, but maybe there could be something there at some point.
Next, we have the Princess Goblin, category World of Final Fantasy. For a searcher that only searches 2 names, this card sure has a lot of great targets.
Yeah.
There's very good Princess Sarah backups. We're going to see another one coming up here soon. There's so many Warrior of Lights, and that card, that's a card name that's just going to continue to get support and love because it's just such a popular character. So this one's only going to get stronger. I mean, I couldn't even list all the possibilities. You mentioned the new Warrior Light Legend we'll talk about later in the Light section. We know there's the Light Princess Sarah backup. Again, there's the new Legend Princess Sarah backup. It's just, for having 2 names it searches for, damn, does this card have a lot of targets. Go ahead. Yeah,
and it's got a great job too, because Verena and the 1 CP Goblin searches it, and for the Warrior of Light, like we were all thinking, the 4-element Warrior of Light. This is like the most obvious home for this card. It searches the Princess Sarah to get you your 4th color. Like if you have Verena Princess Goblin and then the Princess Sarah, all you need is the fire or the earth, and like the deck's already online. And it's obviously search. If you've already drawn those cards, it just searches for the Warrior of Light itself. So it's like it's foolproof. It's great. Obviously, it works really well with the new Warrior of Light too. For some reason, I don't know why they thought that was necessary, but there's also that. So lots of good 3 CP backups that work with that card. Whole host of forwards. I don't know what that deck ends up looking like, but this card is like definitely a part of it. I would expect. Yeah. I don't know like how valuable to think of it as like a way to search for Light Princess Sarah in like Mono Wind, or a way to search for just a new like searching backup in Mono Wind. I'm not sure if that's particularly relevant, but this is the first card that we had like full knowledge of that started like a 3 backup chain. So it's like you could get Verena and a Princess Goblin into another backup, and that works in like Wind Water or Wind Water, anything, because the Princess Sarah just works like that. So. Amazing card, and we're gonna get to talk about the other 3 backup chain search later in Water when we talk about lineup. But it's a new level of consistency in deck building for some reason.
Soon, very soon, we'll have backups that legit always search out another backup. As long as you see one backup, you're searching out every backup you could need.
Yeah.
One day soon. So speaking of backups, while we're on that subject, this is Sid 2. He's a 4 cost, not quite a 3. Yeah. Searches for any card with warp, adds it to your hand. I got to see someone use this in action, and they did the play that I immediately thought of, which is that he played it turn 1, he searched out Theodore, immediately warped Theodore. Then turn 2, he broke the Sid to remove the warp counter, so he actually came in a turn early. Now, was that worth it? I don't know, because you're immediately losing a backup that you just paid a lot for. So, like, if he searched out Vayne, like, I kind of almost wish it said any card that mentions warp, you could get it, because Vayne doesn't really have, like, that whole Theodore Vayne combo. The problem was you could never really get the Vayne consistently. Right. If he searched Vayne, I'd be way higher on it. I mean, I like the idea that you can surprise, remove a warp out of nowhere, but warp's just kind of a weak mechanic in general anyway. So yeah, if he could search Vayne, I'd be a lot higher. Otherwise, right now, like, he's good and he's an engineer. Maybe that'll mean something in the future, but right now he's kind of just.
Yeah. I don't think that it's not obviously not awful, right? Because it's like kind of like a 2 CP backup, and then you're paying 2 CP for the Theodore, you can kind of get 3. The problem is just like, if you're playing like Ice Wind, is that really how you want to be spending your time? And it's a cool idea. I don't think that there's any way to search this Sid 2 in the first place. So like, that's kind of like an ability it's not something that you're going to be able to do after like turn 1. I'm not sure like how important the slots are. He has a good job, and there's lots of engineer stuff going on, and especially like the wind and lightning, I think. But I don't know. I'm not sure what to make of it. I don't know how I'm supposed to be playing it. I do agree it'd be a lot better if he could also search out Vayne, because then I would be like a lot more interested. I don't really want to like play this card, just like search Charlotta and then warp Charlotta. Like, that doesn't really feel like a winning strategy. Like, I have to search for my searcher and then that searches for the card that I want. Like, it's a nice option to have for L3, I think, specifically, where you a lot of the time just have to play warp cards, because that is just like a good chunk of the powerful cards in the format.
Yeah.
Get like your Melvian or whatever it is, but yeah, I don't know. It's just okay, I think.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Next we have Summoner, generic search for any win summon. The second text is kind of meaningless. He gains 2k power. I can't see a world where that would ever really be relevant. You're basically paying to search the summon. I don't know, like, I haven't seen any Win deck that's like, I need a way to search this summon. It's not like Win just hasn't succeeded before then, so I don't know. I just don't really see a place for this guy, and he costs 4 and he's only 5. Like, maybe if his stats are a little better, I'd like him a little more, but even then, like, I don't know. Is there a Win summon you desperately have to search for?
Yeah. There was a big fuss from people when this card was released. They were like, oh my god, this is so broken, because you can search for any Win summon, and like, that's a good one. But like, the thing is, the only Win summon that Win like really needs to succeed is Chocobo, and Izana just does that already. Like, it's just not an issue. It's not a problem, So I don't agree with the people who are making a fuss about this. I think they'll find pretty quickly that this card was actually just useless most of the time. It's just too expensive for the job that it's doing. So.
Next, we have our first legend backup since, is it Ovalia? Opus 13? I think that was the last one.
Yeah.
Yep. Another princess, of course. I think she was a princess. So here we have Princess Sarah. A little more in that EX burst hate. However, it only turns off choosing bursts, and I've already seen someone use it and be like, aha, you can't target it. You go, cool, here's a burst that lets me draw a card. It's like, well, okay, it didn't do anything about that. It's a 2 CP, so obviously it's free. It can be searched out. It's Job Princess. We know how relevant that is with things like Sarah. And then its action ability, or its second action ability, I should say, is like fine. It kind of gives a way to turn additional copies of itself, or maybe even those spare Sarahs that you draw out. It actually gives them something, which is kind of neat. I could see that popping up maybe more than it reads. Again, a weird card where great job, name's good, both effects are absolutely fine. Does this take over slots from something else, though? I mean, I'm an EX hater, so I definitely think it does, but I've also heard other people like, I don't know, it doesn't actually do anything that special. So how do you see our princess?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the boat of like, it doesn't really do anything that special, and I think it's got a really big problem here in that it doesn't have like, it's not card name Princess Sarah SOPFFO or whatever it is, card name Princess Sarah, so it competes really heavily with the light Princess Sarah, which is just a huge downside when basically there's just like no reason not to splash like a billion colors in your decks at this point. Like there's like no downside unless you're like a big aggro deck to just splashing colors a lot of the time, So Yeah, I don't know. I think that this card doesn't do anything particularly special. The one place that I thought about, like, well, this is actually probably just worth it, is like in Wind Water specifically. You know, you have Verena into Princess Goblin into this Princess Sarah, and then that also discards your extra copies of Sarah, or, you know, whatever that you draw later. Lena is another princess. Is like there's just a ton of princesses in those colors, and you can also play Sarah into King Tycoon into Lena in those same colors. So they have these like amazing backup searching chains.
Yeah,
never have to worry about anything. And then I'm just like, all right. And then like, what am I doing in Wind Water? Like I'm just like, I have no idea what you want me to do here. No idea like why I'm supposed to be playing these colors. It doesn't feel particularly interesting. If I'm supposed to be playing like Wall with these colors, that I really want to play is like more 3-drops, you know, like, and it's just like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's really a deck at this point, and maybe there's something that I'm just like not seeing, and maybe Wind Water has like this new angle that you can play from that doesn't it just wants any consistent backup line that it can get access to. And in that case, I think this card is probably just like a shoe in there. Like it just seems like really, really good for that deck. I just have no idea what that deck is supposed to be. So.
Yeah. No, you're right. The backup chain is incredible, but the only even like Wind Water deck that I haven't even seen in a while is Sky Pirates. But of course, that demands that you play a bunch of Sky Pirates, so you probably can't fit this stuff. So. Well, I guess we'll see where she ends up. We do need another princess, of course. This is Sarah Mobius. And this one just has a very simple action ability. Basically mimics the Princess Sarah Light action ability, except that one, of course, was restricted to whatever element it was in. This one will just buff all your forwards by 1k. But you can only do it if you control 2 or more princesses. She does count herself, so as long as you have one more thing. And probably, again, if you're playing Wind Water and you used Sarah to find this, awesome. I don't know what that deck looks like. The Light Sarah buff has been relevant sometimes, like maybe in 20% of the games I've seen, or maybe even less. Like it's not bad, but it's also like it's never been like, oh my gosh, this is the ability that just wrecks the game for me. You know, it's like on very rare occasions, haha, that 8k actually won't die to Amaterasu, you know, something like that. So with all that in mind, I mean, I don't know. I'd be surprised to see this one show up unless there is some Wind Water whatever deck that I just haven't foreseen.
Yeah, maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's supposed to be like a Wind Water princess deck, like a princess tribal deck. I am totally not seeing it right now. I'm not sure what it's supposed to be. So if it does exist, I think this card is just like, it's just generically like a fine, good card. You know, like a buff on demand is just fine. I don't know if this actually slots into the backup lineup, which is probably the only thing that I would be like super concerned about. It does seem like it'll be very good at L3 if that ever comes to pass. But
yeah. Break out your Opus 10 Jurgens. Play that onto the field for free. All right. Next, we have Sophia, or Lulu Light, as I like to call her. I mean, Lulu's the most obvious comparison, right? It's a 3-cost win forward. It gets back a summon, and then you can dull Strangers of Paradise to you're dealing 5k instead of setting to 5k. Which one of those is better? Well, I'll let you answer that when it's your turn. I mean, she's a bigger body than Lulu. I don't know, but this one, Lulu was just so generically strong. Enter, get the summon, or even a Yuna if she happened to be there. Or is this one, you have to have the right amount of Strangers of Paradise forwards, which I'm sure that's not very hard to hit if you play Jack and then search her out. But it's still a condition versus Lulu just being like, nah, I'm just going to get that back. So maybe that's unfair. Some people even mentioned, well, maybe you just play it as a second Lulu. But again, this then requires Strangers of Paradise deck space, so I don't see it. I see Lulu as the superior card. Maybe that's the wrong way to think about this. How do you see Sophia?
I think Lulu is, for the most part, just a better card than this, but the very clear, like, difference maker here is that, well, if you're playing Jack and you're in Win, then you're gonna play the card. You know, it's like, it seems very simple. Like, if you play the Jack, then you play this, and then maybe you also play a Lulu next to it. You know, I'm not sure what you're doing there. Maybe there's a mono wind angle. I don't know, because the Tiamat is actually pretty good too. Seems more like an L3 kind of consideration than a standard one, but you never know. Obviously, it works really well when you have both her and Lulu on the board. That just like is just like a match made in heaven. So I've considered like playing some like, you know, maybe Fire Wind or Earth Wind decks that kind of use this as one element of removal. And the important thing to note is Lulu doesn't trigger on your opponent's turn, but this card does trigger on your opponent's turn. So, you know, if you cast an Amaterasu, she'll like basically always finish off, the Warrior of Light. If they play Warrior of Light and you Amada, she will finish off the Warrior of Light by herself. Like there's no extra stuff like with that required. So works really well with cards like Brynhildr too, obviously. So like a lot of the fire summons, it just works really, really well with those. And I've never been playing a Wind deck and thought like, oh man, you know what I don't need right now? A Lulu. So it's just like, I do think that there is, some kind of angle to playing these kinds of Wind X decks where you just play 2 Lulu and 2 of this because you just want those kinds of effects all the time. It's just always good to add a Sora back to your hand, basically. There's never a time when it's not a good thing to do. So I could see this being like one of those like better when you have both kind of things. I don't think it's ever like usurping Lulu in deck building decisions unless something like really, really weird is going on. But
yeah, good. I like the Fire Wind. Maybe there's something there. Well, you mentioned the Tiamat, so let's go ahead and bring him down. The first time I read this, I just totally dismissed it because I was like, I feel like I've seen this effect 100 times. But I thought his enter the field also hit forwards. I didn't realize it says character, so you can hit backups with this. I was like, oh, okay, maybe there's something there. And then you can pop a Tyro, a Shantoto if you have to, whatever. Probably not too many monsters. And then if you're in mono win, just again, he's kind of a black belt in that he doesn't have an ongoing effect, but he's also just protected. It says you can't target him, and if he takes any damage, so again, if they do like an opposing Luso, he's actually not going to die to that, right? Make sure I read that correctly. Yeah, as long as you still have enough characters when the Luso resolves, obviously, So maybe that's worth something, because I've seen some of those Wind, Ice Wind, Earth Wind mirror matches, and they just take turns Lusoing each other's board. Like, maybe that's worth something to have a guy that, hey, I'm not going to die to that. So what do you think of Tiamat?
Yeah, I think so. Again, this is more of a mono win focused card. It's not completely unplayable outside of that because the end of the field ability and just being searchable off of Jack is just potentially interesting enough. But generally, I'm going to talk about it from a mono win perspective, and from that perspective, it really fits quite well with like what the Sky Pirate cards are telling you to do. And I'm not saying that like you're going to play both of them. There are like a lot of new cards there, but it says like you want to play a lot of characters to the board as opposed to casting a lot of times. So works a little bit better in those kind of like hate bear, kind of like you can't target my stuff kind of decks. And these kinds of effects are really a lot more potent when they can't be chosen and they don't take damage. That really like limits it to like Shantoto and the new Neo X death, which we'll get to in a little bit as well. But those are basically like the only things that can really clear at that point. So I think that this card is deceptively better, and especially deceptively better than the other chaoses this set. Like obviously the chaoses are generally all pretty poor most of the time, and this is the first time that the cyclist has been relatively playable. And among those, I think Tiamat probably looks like the best to me personally. It just seems really realistic if you're playing like Atomos, Ochu, and you have like 5 backups. So like it's really not that hard to get this card up to his condition. So in that regard, I wouldn't be surprised, especially if there is kind of a Jack angle, to see this pop up as like a 1 of here and there, or like a 2 of if you were playing more dedicated SOP FFO kind of stuff. So
nice, very nice. Let's bring out our artificial fairy. This is Nini. Again, kind of another Luso-ish effect in that you really want to have cast 3 so that you can get the card draw. Other than that, she gives you a quick little scry. You can look at it, either take that one right into your hand. Kind of reminds me of the old, what was that backup everyone used to run? Echo. Yeah, the Echo, where you could basically check the top card and then either put it on the bottom or draw it for her second effect. Kind of reminds me of that. Yeah. Of course, this is on a forward. Again, there's nothing wrong with this card. Are you going to pick this? Do you have slots for this? Especially, again, I'm thinking of mono win. Right. Not that this is locked to mono win, but you hear the word cast. I just think of this. Maybe this goes on Ice Wind. Do you have room for this, though? I know how tight those lists are. Like, are you going to make room for Vaughn and the Nini? Like, again, nothing wrong with her. I don't know. I just don't see how there's room for her.
Yeah, I think that this card is... I've had pretty good experiences playing this card. I don't know if it was always the best use of my slot, exactly like you said, though. I do think that there is a consideration because it is category FFBE. There is the Moogle that searches category FFBE in color, and that is also going to search for Fina. So there is kind of like a little... and obviously it overlaps with Stiltskin and stuff like that. There is some consideration for Nini in there. I don't know if that's the right avenue for your slots. I think... It's really important with mono win right now if you're playing a lot of characters as opposed to more summons. So before we were playing like 15 summons or whatever, right? Maybe you slim that down, add more characters because that's how many characters that, you know, the deck is wanting you to play now. As if it was Van, Balthier, you know, Tiamat, stuff like that. If you are playing those cards. And when you do, like, Nini is one of the cast payoffs. You know, you have to have cast 3 to get the draw. Whereas maybe you need more cast enablers, like cards like Riku, cards like Ochu, that don't require any cast to function. They kind of build you up to those casts later.
Yeah.
I kind of wish that this Scry ability was one of the cast enablers and not one of the cast payoffs.
Yeah.
I think it would have been a lot better at that point, because at 1, you're already going to have, you know, Luso or Ritz or whatever. Like, if you're using that with the Balthier package, then Ritz is like kind of one of the payoffs and not really one of the enablers. So I'm not sure that this one makes the cut. That being said, it does just feel good to resolve, you know, a Scry and a Draw 1 in the deck.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's better than Alexander. I'm not sure if it's better than Ochu or whatever. But it does feel good to resolve it, and it wouldn't surprise me if some players opted to play one of them.
Yeah. Scry, one of my favorite keywords from Magic, so I always appreciate when it kind of shows up here in FF. Okay, you've mentioned him quite a few times. Here we have to get to Balthier, and I'm so curious to know what you think of this card, because I've heard opinions all over the place that some people think he's terrible, some people think he's just like so strong and super busted, and I have to admit, I struggle to see what to do with this guy. Again, clearly, he doesn't fit in the old Sky Pirates, so I tried to push that out of my mind. You mentioned a little earlier about having a bunch of characters on the field, so maybe that's where he goes, is that the more characters you play, the more these pings you go off. But I'm also thinking, well, wait a minute. You have to play him and then 2 more win characters to deal 9k, which basically takes out 1 forward. And I'm like, okay, so if you're casting all this stuff, if you're going to go through all this stuff casting him, isn't the whole Luso thing just better anyway? Or do you combine this with Luso? Or is his benefit that you don't have to do it all in one turn if he sticks around, and then you Ritz, well, like I said, obviously Ritz a huge payoff card with him. So I don't know. I just don't really see it, but I also, in some of my testing, I haven't seen anyone use it yet. So maybe it's just one of these, I need to see how it functions and what the potential is to really appreciate the card. Because as I read it, it doesn't sound strong to me. I would love to be convinced otherwise.
Okay, so I think first things first, a lot of people are going to say, well, like, aren't you just... Like, Mono Wind already has Luso. And I think that is something that a lot of... I think it's kind of a trap for evaluating the card, because the whole point of a card like this is to be able to play enough cards to kill what you need to kill without going all out 7 casting and playing Luso. Because a lot of the times, especially the earlier in the game it is, if you have to Luso, you're kind of down for like 2 turns. You can't really Luso again the next 2 turns, unless you're playing like JFVs like Earth Wind, because that deck never fizzles out. It just never stops Lusoing. Runs out of cards, but it never stops Lusoing, basically. But in Mono Wind specifically, a lot of the times when you have to go all out on like that turn 2, turn 3 Luso, just to kill like 2 threatening forwards or whatever, you're kind of down like and out of the game for like 2-3 turns while you rebuild. And I think Balthier offers a nice middle ground solution for a lot of those problems. You know, like your opponent has a rug, your opponent has like the fire, like a 5-draw, like a Xenos or something like that. You know, like one of these things that is like threatening to kill you, and you have to deal with it, but you don't really want to spend your entire hand to 7 cast and like run out of things to do. I think Balthier is a great middle ground for these kinds of things. Like if you want to kill a Xenos, all you have to do is play Balthier and then Fat Chocobo, and that just kills the Xenos, you know. And it's kind of stuff like that. I think the bottom text is pretty. People like start building the thing, and you're like, well, I'm not going to be able to fit so many Sky Pirates in there. And I think that's a little bit of a trap. I think Kites, other new copies of himself, Van, and by extension Pandemonium, if you're playing Pandemonium, also turns into Van, which turns into copies of himself. I think this is a lot more useful than I thought it would be. I thought it would be something that happens, you know, sometimes, occasionally, but I think it's actually more like a thing that you can just do like every turn if you want to. It's very easy to trigger to change Luso into Asura into like a Fran or something that you can add back to your hand and then use Balthier. So it kind of feels like it also combines the role with Rosa a little bit in that you really want to hit the 3 cast on Rosa. This kind of gives you an alternative solution to getting that third cast. So I think the card is a lot better than I thought it was. I do not think it's like as good as Luso. I don't think that that's like a condemnation of the card. You know, I think that the card is quite good if it's not as good as Luso. You know, so I think that there is more here to work with than what a lot of people have said. I think a lot of people have just put it out of their mind completely. The thing is not worth doing. That like Win just doesn't have slots to do this. I think that Win definitely does have slots, and this is a pretty good nail in the coffin type card. If you answer your opponent's board with this and then they can't answer the card, like they just don't get to play forwards a lot of the time, you know. Like against Luso, you don't know if they're going to be able to 7 cast again, or if they have like 1 card in hand, you know they're probably not going to be able to 7 cast again. But against Balthier, it's hard to pin down exactly what's possible at any given point in time. It does ask that we move towards a more character-focused mono win deck, and I think that's the biggest cost of the card, is going to be that slots, you know, moving back away from Chocomog, probably away from, you know, Chocobo 1 in favor of more, you know, monsters or more other cast enablers and characters that are getting played to the field. That being said, I'm on board for it. I think that a more board-focused mono win deck is something that has been a long time coming, so I'm pretty interested in playing this card going forward.
That was an excellent case made for Balthier, Jared, and I hope you're right. I really liked the frame you put that in with the middle ground, and yeah, we've had those games where, oh crap, they're going aggro, and you're right, like fully investing in the Luso kind of knocks yourself out. So all right, people, show me the way with Balthier. I want to see him out there. Moving on to Pandemonium. I need to refresh what this does. 4 to 5 or more, 8K. Search for win 4 to 5 or more, add it to your hand, and obviously you get both effects if Pandemonium is at least the 3rd caster later. Okay.
Yeah.
5 costs that 8K would kill. How many of those exist right now? I can't even pull one out of my mind. I guess Rain?
None.
Rain and World of Final Fantasy.
There's really none. You're just supposed to do it with Lulu, I think, is the idea.
I gotcha. Yeah, set it to 5, which makes sense.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot of really good high-cost win forwards. You mentioned the Vaughn earlier. I still love Bismarck. I don't know where he sits in the world right now, but that card I think is still very strong. Yuffie is, of course, one of Win's anti-aggro beaters, whatever you want to consider her. So no lack of targets there. Again, I hate to be a broken record, but just Wind has been so strong that just sits slots. You've got to fit the Asura, you've got to have Chocobo, or maybe this goes in a different deck. Maybe this goes more in a Balthier type thing, but I would assume he would still want those cards too. Like, do you have the slots to play this? I will say too, I always loved this summon in Final Fantasy VIII, so I'm glad to see it get like such cool visual representation, because I always thought this was a cool summon. Card-wise, I think the card's fine. I just don't know where it fits. Again, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly on the same page there. The card doesn't really fit in cast, I think. I think if you play any, you play 1, and then it's like going to be like sometimes searching Lock and Icewind, which is fine, but I'm not like Lock was already one of like the borderline cards in Icewind, which sounds so crazy to say at this point, but like that is kind of like how far we've come. So I'm not really sure how important that is. I think more importantly, maybe in Mono Wind, it's maybe worth it to search Van. Maybe you have like a 1 of Bismarck. You don't actually really want to draw like a bunch of Bismarcks. Yeah. They're not really good for casting. But if you can have access to it, sometimes, you know, maybe that's worth it. If you can fit, you know, like a 1 Bismarck, 1 Pandemonium, and some amount of Vans or something like that. I think more than cast, it's more likely if you run like a Yuffie deck specifically, like Pandemonium being able to search Yuffie against aggro and being able to search S ability as well, and that's, you know, summoning a lot is something that's really repeatable in Win, so, you know, you could potentially like kind of like pseudo lock aggro out of the game if you can search for your extra copies of Yuffie after you have 1 on the board, you know. So I do think there's just enough good text on the card that the card will see play at some point. It's just like not possible that it won't see play. Is that in cast? I don't know. I think that's kind of a sketchy outlook. In Yuffie decks, though, I think you just slam this card. I'm pretty sure that searching Yuffie and searching copies of Yuffie is just always going to be good. So
can't go wrong with that. Next, we have Penelo, another lovely full art here. Again, when I first read this, I was like, this is so bad compared to the other Penelo, but it clearly is trying to occupy a different space. It has a really good break zone trigger, although it doesn't get, or 3 or more. Okay, so it does get Balthier, it does get Vaughn, it doesn't get the lower stuff. Although, again, a lot of people would argue that, well, break zone triggers just aren't as relevant these days. She can become free, essentially, when you play her, and she'll just trigger the Balthier, but I don't know. Is that enough? Is that enough to play a 2 cost that gives you back its 2 CP, and then if it dies, you could potentially get something? Like, it doesn't read interesting to me, or it doesn't read like, wow, that's a powerful card. But perhaps its power lies in a combination with its other cards, like Balthier, like something else. You tell me, because it doesn't read powerful to me. It reads very weak.
Yeah, I think it doesn't read particularly powerful to me either. I think if I'm going to make a case for this card, it's not even in mono win, because I don't think you really want it in mono win that much. I think if you're playing the 3 CP Fran and you're playing like a dedicated Fran deck, maybe this card is an interesting way for you to recur your Fran at some point, and like something that the card can play, and like she does activate characters, so maybe there's something going on there where you're dueling your characters to do something, and then you play Penelo, and then she comes. I don't really know how we're supposed to do this. It is a nice recursion element for the Skypire deck that doesn't really have recursion unless you're playing dedicated Earth. But then if you're playing a Fran deck, you have access to Earth, so you should have Kusith, and it's just not really clear what we're supposed to be doing with these cards. I do think if I could just play Fran and mono win, I would be like more tempted to do this, but like that's obviously not an option, so I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing with it.
Yeah. Next we have Gale Serpent General Najalith. It's pretty, again, it can be reduced to 2, can't be chosen by abilities. That's nice. This one's pretty generic and forgettable to me. That being said, I've always been a fan of action abilities like this where, like, well, technically you can block as an 8K and then bump yourself to a 12K. Yeah. I know that's very old school. That's not really relevant these days, except with, like, Warrior of Light, but I've just kind of always had a soft spot for abilities like that. Other than that, this one seems like pack fodder. What do you think?
Yeah, I think maybe this one is deceptively better than it looks, but like you said, it is kind of an old school kind of approach to stuff. It's really nice that it can't be chosen by abilities, so it can be chosen by summons, so there's like other problems with that. I think maybe this card is a monster for limited is kind of my hunch, is that, Wind is probably not taken very highly in limited. I could be totally wrong about that. I haven't actually done any limited analysis myself, but Wind tends to not be taken very highly, and I think this card is deceptively quite good in limited. So if you could take it there, I think it'd be pretty strong there. In L3, I don't know if we have room to play this, but maybe it can be okay. It as a 2 CP 8K with this set of abilities, if you evaluate it like that, it is pretty solid. So
yeah,
maybe.
You've mentioned Fran many a times. Here's our newest Fran. We'll protect Balthier, which you probably definitely want if you're playing that new Legend Balthier. Her action ability, it's so specific. So she comes back onto the field dull, but you can only use it if Balthier specifically entered the field this turn, and obviously she's got to be in the break zone. So you can't just like repeatedly recur unless you have some way to keep re-entering Balthier. Did she have to come in dull? I don't know. Would that have been too broken to have an active 3K body? I don't think so, but I don't know, maybe. It's I don't know. Again, this one just reads so generic, but it does mean with Balthier, okay, you've got 6K right there, so maybe that alone is worth it. And the fact that you are protecting him not from summons, but you're protecting him from abilities, and so now they have to chew through this little body before they can get to him. Maybe that's enough. Because again, this clearly isn't my style, whatever this deck is. But I don't know. How do you see Fran?
I think it's like okay, just barely good enough to consider playing. It kind of lets you hold up a little bit of pseudo protection for Balthier on your opponent's turn. So like you can play the Balthier, and if you have Fran in the break zone, they just can't they can't Porum it, they can't like Warrior of Light, Rosa, Warrior of Light it down on your opponent's turn, and that is something that I think is pretty valuable for the card. For such as a low cost, right? Yeah. All you have to do is throw it away. It's very, very simple. Stiltskin searches it out. You can search it out with Penelo. You can discard this to activate the Balthier too. So I think there are some nice just the right amount of synergies that you consider playing this if you're playing a Balthier deck. I do not think I would ever play more than one, but maybe it is just useful enough that you just always slot the one in when you have Balthier.
Yep. We shall see if she shows up. Here we have Machina, and if anyone's watched any of my stuff for a while, I really like Class 0 Cadets, which is funny because it's not like I love that game. I thought the game was fine, but I don't know why. I've just always liked the Cadets idea in FF, and they've just felt so ignored and so abandoned for a long time, and I got really excited with this set. But Machina ain't cutting it. It's nice to see him in a different element. He's just so generic. Like, I tried it in both a wind lightning version and a fire wind version. Like, I've tried him in all the different... And I mean, he's fine. Again, there's nothing wrong with him. He's almost always going to be a 3-cost haste can't be... Yeah, you know, thank you. 3,000 power, so an 8k haste can't be chosen, which is fine, but then that's it. Like, you can't really rely on his special. That's not consistent, and it only hits forwards of fire more. Anyway, like, just, I don't know. I guess I was hoping for that color fixer, and we'll go into more Cadets 2 in Lightning, but I was just like, he's not... This card isn't saving the tribe, I'll say that.
Yeah, I think maybe this is the best Machina that we've gotten so far. That's not really a high bar to hold yourself to. It's like, okay, you know, kind of thing. I think I would have been a lot more happy with the card if it could be chosen by abilities rather than summons. I think it'd be a much bigger boon for the card. That being said, would that really like save the card? Would it suddenly be like a really good card? It's like, no, not really. I mean, it's just fine. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? So we have the Dragoon. We talked about those crystal backups. We'll move past to our last wind card, and this is Riku. I immediately thought of... I don't even remember what Opus it was, but there was an Aranea that was basically the same card in Lightning. Although that one was technically weaker. Riku's like a little stronger because I think that one was a base 3k. But same thing, enters, you just reveal if it's a wind card, add it to your hand. Very solid in mono wind. I know all night I've been going, the slots, Jared, what about the slots? But as you mentioned, sometimes you do need those cantrips that you don't want to have to blow the loose so early to bounce it back because you're exposing it. But Riku, it's also what's nice is there isn't really a Riku in Wind that people are using, so this is a good name for it because it doesn't interfere with anything, and it's an EX burst, and Wind, that tends to be one of its weaknesses is that it doesn't really have a lot of EX bursts, so solid card all around. I will be surprised if not like a single copy doesn't show up in some Wind decks.
Yeah, I think I just started jamming 2 of this in all of my mono wind variants. I'm pretty sure that this card is just great. I like the way that Alex put it in that, like, the wind nerds, like, you know, like me and stuff like that, we want to jam out, like, every, like, fraction of a percent that we can get. And EX bursts, like, slotting EX bursts that are functional is just, like, the best way to do that. This is just a very, very functional EX burst. For some reason, a damage 3 becomes a 7k. I'm not sure that it really needed that text to be good. I'm pretty sure it was already good without that, but they did put it on there anyways. So, yeah, I'm all for this card. You know, add it back with Ashura. I'm not sure, like, how you end up slotting this. I think that I like this a little bit better than the 1 CP Chocobo. The card selection is worse, but it leaves a body, enables your Balthier, you know, like stuff like that. I kind of like this a little bit better over like those kinds of slots. Maybe it's a little bit better than the 3rd Zidane, assuming you're not intending on playing a lot of Wind Mirrors or like versus War of Light or whatever, but maybe it's a little bit better than, you know, a 2nd Izana if you're still playing 2 Izana, like stuff like that. So
yeah, no, very good. Well, folks, that's it for Wind. So we got our first 3 elements wrapped up there, but don't go anywhere. Jared and I will be back very shortly with the next 3, so we'll see you in a little bit. Bye.